Morning everybody, welcome to the final council meeting for the year on the 21st of December, very close to Christmas, and try and take us seriously in turkey hats and Santa outfits if we can. We'll kick off with the karakia that's in the agenda. Feel free to join in and speak. Whakataka te hau, ki te uru, whakataka te hau, ki te tonga, kia makina kina, ki uta, kia mataratara, ki toi, He Apiana, Tiatakura,
Tio, Hei Huka, Hei Hauhu, Te Hei Maori Ora.
Cease the winds from the west, cease the winds from the south, let the breeze blow over the land, let the breeze blow over the ocean, let the red-tipped dawn come with a sharpened ear, a touch of frost, a promise of a glorious day. Okay, so we'll start off with some health and safety procedural. Toilets, welcome to the people in the gallery there. Toilets are just out that door there to the right. Should there be an evacuation, follow Santa and his reindeers out the building and down the stairwell, not the elevator, and out to Space Street. Earthquake, drop, cover and hold. Please turn your phones onto silent. And this meeting's being recorded for live video and live streaming, so by remaining in the meeting you are consenting to being filmed for viewing by the public. Okay, so we will move on to apologies, which we have for Councillor Chamberlain and Councillor Fraser, and we have Councillor Spraggan needing to get away at 3:30 and Councillor needing to leave at 4 o'clock. I'll move those. Sorry, mate.
To be away by 3:15 too. Thank you.
So I'll move those from the chair. Do I have a second for those? Thank you, Councillor Menzies. All in favour? Anyone against? Carried. Leave of absence. Do we have any further leaves of absence? None planned. All good. Conflict of interest. Do we have anyone with conflict of interest today? In the remuneration package, but there's an exemption around, because we've all got a conflict of interest around that, because we're just making a recommendation, and the remuneration authority actually makes the final decision, so we've got an exemption around that one. We do have a extraordinary item today, and that's just a report that's come in subsequent to the agenda going out for the future local government reform. It's just an information report, no decision needs to be made from it. And just a minor change to the agenda as well, with shifting the commercial forestry management report from public excluded into open. So I'll move that from the chair, that shifts into the public arena. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor O'Brien, all in favour? Aye. Anyone against? Carried. Right, the minutes from the previous meeting held on the 30th of November, would someone like to move that they're true and correct?
Yep.
O'Brien and Councillor East, all in favour?
Aye.
Anyone against? Carried. We don't have any public participation today in this? No. So I'll move on to the first item on the agenda, community updates, and I'll welcome Bobby Brown to the table.
There we go. What's up? Right. All good?
Oh, yes. Well, it still works at Great South, but has been seconded on to doing a work stream for Beyond 2025, and you can talk to us about that, I believe.
Awesome. Kia ora koutou, ko Bobby Brown Takamoa, is getting used to me, Rob, and I didn't get the memo about the Santa jumper. I've got a good one I could have worn today, so apologies for that. But look, I'm just going to take 10 to 15 minutes to provide an update on where the refresh of the regional development strategy is, which also is the long-term planning workstream for just transitions. So I've got 3 or 4, maybe 5 slides which just outline the process to date, just particularly for new councillors. And then I just wanted to probably spend 5 minutes just asking you guys a couple of questions around how we measure success, what some of the key priorities are for you. Your staff have been excellent and very engaged in the process to date, but I guess it's just this opportunity with the new council to sort of socialise it and see if things have changed. Okay? So that's pretty much what I just said there. Okay, so just really quick though, on the face of it, the region is looking pretty good. So unemployment is at a structural baseline of 2.6%. We're a powerhouse in terms of producing 15% of all tradable exports for the country. And from when Swords happened about 8 years ago, the GDP has increased to just under 7.3 billion. But as we know, there's a lot of challenge out there, and it is around housing. The population has become static, and there's, of course, challenges with workforce. At the same time, we've got a lot of stuff coming out of Wellington. We're still dealing with the pandemic, and some of these long-term issues around climate change, etc., are starting to become very important and part of how we look at things now. And I guess that last point is just to acknowledge that everybody's in the same boat, so what we're dealing with in Southland is not unique to us. The second point I wanted to make was that, just to refresh that, out of Swords, which was the Southland Regional Development Strategy in 2015, over half of all the projects were finished and another quarter are still in process. So a lot of people will probably have forgotten that some of these projects were in the plan, but things like that jet to Auckland, England's Hotel, the CBD refresh, Milford Ops, Curia Bay, they were all in there. So what we're saying is that it's probably a good time to refresh that. And it's, of course, that goal around population as well. So they had a goal of 10,000 more people, and we are tracking to achieve that, 7,700. However, that has become static lately. Okay, and the third point is around TY indicating it was going to close end of 24, and that, of course, triggered the Just Transitions process within government. So this Just Transitions process, I won't go too much here, but what it's basically saying is that we've got a lot of eggs in the TY basket, so we want to make sure that we look at other alternatives to move the region forward. So there were 7 work streams, and one of those was long-term planning. So what I've just said, 3 points. Swords needs refreshed. We're looking good as a region, but there's some challenges, and TY closing has basically meant we have to look at the future. And so beyond 25 is the plan, which links it all together. That's what it looks like. So we have 3 key entities that we report through to. This is just to give you an understanding of how it fits. So Just Transitions have an enduring oversight group, which has a mixture of central, local government and business sector, primary sector, iwi. We've got the Merrill Forum, which of course is the 4 councils, and then there's the Great South Board, which managed the contract with EV. So just to point out that beyond 2025 is not a Great South plan, it is a regional plan, which is being facilitated by Great South. So that just means that what is in the plan isn't just for Great South to do, it's actually acknowledging all the other mahi across the region and different organisations, so quite important. Okay, and then of course we've got lots of different stakeholders involved, from the 3 councils through to the Runaka, 14,000 businesses in the region. Got to make sure we look after them, plus our big guys. And then there's a whole lot of other stakeholders. That pretty much says that. Okay, so just to push forward to this, and I'll come back to that one. In summary, we have got 16 work streams and 5 pillars. Out of that, we've got 4 advisory groups, which have been focusing on those 4 things. So energy, housing, tourism, and attraction retention, particularly thinking of that very low unemployment rate. There are 15 pieces of research which input into the strategy, and the cost to date to deliver beyond 25 is 1.3 million, of which 562,000 of that is from other sources. So we've used the government investment, which was 750,000, to leverage other funds. So those 15 pieces of research, they range from a mobile phone, cell phone assessment of the region, through to funding the housing and the energy strategies, through to the tourism recovery pathway being refreshed. Okay, the other thing in terms of deliverables is that, of course, by middle of June, we will have a plan, and it will link to the Just Transitions process, but of course it is also the refresh of swords. So it's two things in one document, so that'll be June 2023. Another thing that will be produced is that the updated Pathway to Recovery for Tourism, also known as the Destination Management Plan, will be refreshed. And that's really important because that needs to align with Milford opportunities. It needs to acknowledge the world post-COVID and the fact that pre-COVID, tourism was worth about 700 million to the economy. There's about 1,200 operators that, this is their livelihood, depends on tourism. So because over half of our region is conservation estate, people are going to be attracted to the region, whether we want them or not, and we've taken the approach to actually plan for it so that tourism actually gives back more to our people in place than it takes. Another outcome will be the housing report. So there are, as I said before, there's 4 groups that are doing work for Beyond 25. Steve Parry chairs the housing group. There'll be a housing needs assessment undertaken. I think I've talked to you guys about this before. Full stock take of housing in the region, assessment of lots of different things to do with demand, thinking of where people want to live in the future. And of course, this fills into your spatial planning and the climate change work too. Sorry, I'm kind of going through this quick, but get the gist. Another outcome is around the region's 4th energy strategy. So this is quite particular, or quite important at the moment, considering the position of Tiwai and the need with the net zero plans, which is to decarbonise. A lot of our renewable options, etc., won't be at scale to meet what we actually need to help businesses decarbonise in the region. So we're going to need power. The other important bit here is around the fact that the government is looking at the national energy strategy at the moment. So it's really important that Southland articulates our supply and demand needs, and that fits into the national picture. So that piece of work is almost complete, and staff have been involved in that from SDC. And another outcome there is an attraction retention report. So thinking of that very low unemployment figure, how do we support businesses to recruit staff? Where do they live? This is all connected. Another deliverable is around looking at trying to get consistency with population and demographic data. And this will input into multiple planning. So we've got apples with apples. And I don't know if I can go back, but there was a slide before that just showed, I can't go back, this one here. There's 3 bits of work, and we've just commissioned Infometrics to do this. So 3 things will be delivered: a baseline population and demographic data. Then we'll look at basically the future population and demographic projections. And then there'll be an exercise around modelling possible regional shocks. So thinking of our 7.2 billion GDP, these are the big things. For example, carbon forestry and highly productive land, or green hydrogen, Tiwai shut. So all those things will be modelled in terms of GDP, FTE, impact. Okay, so that's just us looking forward with a bit of a risk lens. And of course, these things fit into all the planning, because we've got to make sure, if we're all looking to the future, that we're using the same assumptions. We may all be wrong, but at least we've got the same data. So that will fit into the regional development strategy, the energy work I talked about, the housing, and of course, the council planning, which is where we've worked really hard with your staff to just ensure that we can help populate those really key pieces of work as well. Okay, and for those that haven't seen it, that's the plan. So think of this as a process to make sure the people that need to be involved are, because what we find is some people want to be involved in the tourism work stream but not too interested in the aquaculture. So just think of it as a process. And so this is where I talked about before, there's 4 working groups, 15 bits of primary research. So overall it's going really well. Busy. But I think the process and the approach has been validated, and I think the stuff we're getting out is really good. Famous last words. That slide just really shows you guys the involvement of your staff. And again, I just want to acknowledge all of the staff, because there's a lot going on for councils at the moment, but what we're trying to do is make sure this plan sits or integrates within other plans. So it's not something that sits to the side that people go, how does that connect? Actually, it understands council planning, district planning, LTPs, your new planning to do with climate change, to do with spatial planning, and even things, with your regional land transport plan, so trying to understand future resilience of transport networks, etc. So again, just really want to thank the staff and probably Cameron for his leadership in allowing the staff to be involved in this work. So just a couple of questions now I just wanted to ask you guys. Really hard question. There's two here. So one is around, from your perspective, how we would measure success, thinking of this piece of work, which is at an interesting time with everything going on, and I'm really interested in feedback from you on that. And the second thing is just confirming some of the the priorities for Southland District Council to be included in. And of course, this isn't the first day we've talked about this. There's been a lot of work going on, but it's probably just, if that's okay, Your Worship, to get some feedback from you guys. Hopefully that was a bit of a whirlwind update on something that's quite complex, but...
Well, thank you very much, and I think it's, just want to congratulate you on behalf of the council as well for those 16 work streams in such a small amount of time. To tie all that together to get to where you've got to today, it's pretty impressive, and it's going to be, irrespective of what happens with TY, the data and the information and the direction that we're going to get out of this is going to, at the very least, feed into our long-term plan, but there's going to be so much more that it can do. So, thank you very much. And I think, to answer that question, for me, we're going to see success in enabling us to plan better and see those results come through our community. But does anyone else have anything they want to add to answer that question, how we measure success?
Through Your Worship, I think part of it is actually looking at how much funding we end up attracting back into the region to actually support this work, knowing that we're not going to fund necessarily all this ourselves. So the amount of funding, and then translating that funding back into diversification, so level of diversification and impact on GDP.
Sure. Thanks, Bobby. As far as measuring success, you mentioned the survey, the regional housing survey. So how do you measure? Is it like a KPI for the uptake on a survey? And as far as the engagement of respondents, do you set a bar of this as how much response we'd like to receive, and how do you measure that?
Your Worship. So there's 5 different parts to the housing, and I could have spent like 2 hours talking about each of those work streams. Housing in particular, where we found we added most value was to provide a source of truth with the data. That would actually be then able to be given to private sector developers, you guys with your council planning, and then we all have the same data. So the 5 bits of the 5 deliverables of housing linked to the community survey, which looks at future intent, and we're happy with the response rate at the moment, 3.7% level of confidence, so it's giving us a good spread. We're just having a wee push into some areas where people didn't want to answer it. There's another bit on a stock take and looking at sufficiency, thinking of demand and supply of housing. There's some other work going on around quality of housing, so it's not just a numbers game around not enough housing, it's actually about where people want to live, what type of housing, where their families want to be. And then there's some final stuff around just looking at data, and the desktop review of who's involved and is that previous stuff accurate. So we will present that mid-February back to Council, and for you guys, Nick Hamlin and Teresa Kavanagh have been our main contacts, as well as Michelle Stevenson. And so, because of course we want to align it with your work and inform your planning as well. So you'll get all that, hopefully, and some nice maps and easy to use formats, and then you'll be able to actually, because we'll do it regional, TA, and then down to SA3 or community board level, you'll be able to get a map, scroll over top of it, so Garston, for example, and you'll be able to see the type of houses and that population work. When we put that over top as well, you'll start to see who lives there, and you can start to sort of really see what might be needed there and where there's gaps.
Yeah, Councillor Vice.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Bobby. Yes, you're pretty busy with this project. Just following on with the housing, how would we measure success in housing? We're doing a lot of work with the data, and taking Garston, for example, you're going to find out what sort of housing is required there. But it seems to me that the housing is in crisis because it's costing too much. it's too hard for people to get into housing, to get a roof over their own heads. Is there any concrete initiatives or development around how that could be alleviated? Something over and above the data, because we already know that there's issues.
Through your worship. Yes, so the housing group will prepare a report which will have some high-level recommendations based on the data. So that will come back to the councils and other key stakeholders in the Mayoral Forum, Just Transitions. And then what we want to do is socialise that with you guys, you know, because then you can feed in, because your staff are also doing a lot of work as well. We don't know the answers yet. It's very complex, you know, from affordability through to, for example, in Te Anau, as Sarah knows, we're doing some work with MSD around the impact of not enough long-term rentals because of the peer-to-peer accommodation, you know, which is quite different to a situation on Nakiura, you know, with senior housing. You know, so it's really hard to make generalisations at this stage, but what we want to do is give you all the information we can for you guys to have a good look at it.
Through you, I would question you on that. Rakia has also got Te Anau's problem of a major problem for workers' accommodation.
Through you, Your Worship, the other thing around housing, I see this piece of work as actually feeding into how council enables and supports this whole housing space moving forwards. And we have changes in the RMA coming up. We have an ability to look at that whole open space as a how we zone, because currently part of what council potentially hamstrings is actually the whole zoning of land. And you know, if we're going to move, you know, if this project informs into how we actually zone moving forwards, then that will ultimately feed into how we enable and support housing to be delivered that is affordable, that is in the right places, that delivers what's actually needed for Southland.
The ability to have that strategic overview from the data to be able to make the right decisions in the right places, so we're actually getting communities.
Thank you, Bishop. Part of this has already been mentioned, but I guess in measuring that success, I'll be thinking in terms of, back to us, quality data and quality analysis of the research and information that's been undertaken and obtained. I think coming back to us would be clear recommendations that are both pragmatic and possible, so able to be achieved. And I don't know that it's your role, but as Councillor Graney was indicating, the sourcing funding for undertaking those recommendations will be really important. So it's identifying where that belongs, is that a joint effort or whatever it is. And finally, just council taking responsibility to do what it can do in a timely way. So we have a responsibility, and it all comes back to us as well. Last thing we want to do is have reports sitting around and then we're re-looking at those and doing them again in 5 years' time, because things change quite quickly as well.
Did you want to speak, Michelle?
Thank you, Worship. I was just going to provide some STC as to what's following on from the housing work. There's a gap analysis essentially taking place through this piece of work. So it's laying the foundation for what Southland District Council will look at next in regards to housing. So we needed robust data in order for council to determine its position around housing. So that's what this piece of work is. Staff will then pick up that piece of work in February and we'll move forward with whatever we need for Southland District.
Further?
I don't want to put a pessimistic note, and well done on the progress so far, but given the constant predictions we're getting about the likelihood of a recession coming, and it seems as though unemployment is one of the, what would you say, fallouts of that situation. I'm just wondering about our community resilience going forward, that if all of this doesn't sort of progress the way we'd like it to. And I'm not expecting you to have all the answers in the hat, but I do think it's something we need to be mindful of, given the strength of the predictions we're getting. And we were reliant on where we can row our own boat, perhaps safer.
Through your worship, you're absolutely right, Councillor Duffy, and all the feedback we're getting is that it's just such a really challenging time, and so much could happen. So that's why there's 15 pieces of research, because I think the best thing we can do is to help inform decision making. So that then the leaders, you guys, can actually be confident in the data you get at that point of time. Is going to be useful. So, and I think the other point I'd make too is that this is a regional plan, particularly for housing. People will live in one council area, live in another. So the value of that regional approach, thinking of our longer term regional resilience, is quite important. We've got to do it together.
Okay.
But you're right.
Thank you, Your Worship. Around the energy, Bobby, you mentioned that we need more energy to power the businesses and people's homes. Where does the data centre fit in that space?
So yeah, it definitely fits in. So there's multiple things happening at the moment. The two data centres, DataGrid and T4, require the same amount of power that currently powers TY, so which powers just under 600 megawatts. So it's definitely not for me to make judgments on that, but this becomes an equation of energy, and what we use for what, where it comes from, who generates it, and there's a lot within the private sector that will determine that, particularly with the power suppliers. So we're just trying to get it all. The process has been private sector, local government, central government together, and iwi, most importantly iwi, it's a partnership with Manahika Region. And I think just getting those conversations, having a clear articulation of our current and future power needs is quite important.
Yeah, so it's really, those two data centres, the two data centres, and it's not for you to say, you mentioned, but the comment, it seems a bit odd that we're struggling to get enough energy at the moment, and here we are encouraging two massive energy users to tap into the power in this region, and I would question what the benefit of that energy consumption will be for the people of Southland.
I think part of all of that is making sure we're getting the planning right to meet what potential future needs might be there, and tying it into the current needs and looking at where the potential. But yeah, I mean, different conversation for today, but it does fall into the wider scope and the wider planning of it. Yeah, there's.
Through your worship, I suppose just leading on from Councillor Byers' opinion there, I suppose part of your role is to, as you said, collate the information with regards to looking at TY as an option that probably won't be viable. Certainly from Southland's perspective anyway, I think Rio Tinto has had its fair share of the pie for long enough, and the opportunity that arises from things like maybe the data centre or an alternative use of that power through maybe hydrogen and blue ammonia, the possibility of exportation of blue ammonia to other countries, or the use of that electricity for Sword's mandate of trying to get 10,000 people or 10,000 more people into the region. Using the power for that, I guess that's all part of what you're working towards, right? And just following on from that side of things with regards to that, I mean, I know housing's a big topic at the moment, and there's obviously a real need or a real push from local government's perspective for greater collaboration between local government and central government, right? What is there going to be, because of our geographic location and our lack of people, yet our wonderful resources, is there going to be a real push from your perspective with regards to, say, the changes in immigration laws and the new legislation that's coming from the RMA and the new legislation that's coming in from the Building Act? Are you going to be able to tie all those things in together and to be able to put forward a best case scenario for Southland as a province?
Through your worship, that's certainly the intent, and that's why the partnership with the councils, and in particular the strategy and policy planning teams, has been essential. So I've been really fortunate they've allowed me to join some of their planning across councils. So I think it's very scary. We found about 31 different pieces of new legislation or change or planning happening. And so this plan is different because Swords probably didn't focus enough on the how you implement it and the rules that would help enable it. But we really want to make sure this one does. I'm not saying we're going to dictate or influence policy, but we just want to make sure that there is alignment between what we say the future of the region is with development opportunities and the rules that will allow it to happen.
I'd probably beg to differ. I think it's important that you do influence policy.
Well, that would be up to the staff, the council staff. Again, I can provide the data and the process and the willingness to align everything together, and then, we'll work with them to.
We'll work together on that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're continuing to work together and keeping that relationship close is the key to actually getting this, because it's that whole regional lens, and rather than just looking down the SCC's view, it is that wider, and not just what we focus on, it's sort of and the whole population and everything as well. So, if you have something else, Councillor?
I'll just quickly, Your Worship, thank you. And you're looking for ways to measure success and around the food space, and perhaps the tourism come into the food space, and bearing in mind, or with a mind to the possible slowdown in economies around the world. I wonder if perhaps one way to measure success in the food space would be how much food we grow for ourselves in this region here, how successful we are in diversifying the food offering in Southland.
Your Worship, I think that another measure of success would actually be around footprint of business, you mentioned footprint of tourism already, and that tourism gives back more than it takes, but I think you could apply that lens across business as well, particularly when we're looking at longer term, particularly when we're looking into climate change and energy use and sustainability and all those measures. Then that impact, that footprint and impact piece actually comes into play as well.
You got enough of a steer there for that?
Yeah.
Sorry, Councillor Wilson.
Sorry, just one really quick question. You mentioned there's been a bit of conversation about just having really robust data, and collating data is a tricky thing. Is there any opportunities, considering the national census in March, and is that an opportunity? Does that fit into the project? I know the project timelines don't necessarily align. Is there an opportunity there to have more robust data through that?
Yeah, through Your Worship, it's a really good point. We just, 18 census is just out of date, and stats do their best to provide us with updated modelling, but we probably know the reality is that it's not what it was in 2018. But we've had to basically put a peg in the sand and say we need this data to inform this work that's going on now. However, I'd say some of the recommendations will look at ensuring we've got continuity with collecting data in the future, and we use the same rules of how we collected it now, so we get that longitudinal approach. I think that's all we can do. We couldn't wait.
Yeah, very happy with that, Steve. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
We'll touch base again in the new year, and look forward to seeing more. And if there's anything that we can do to help you out, let us know. Thanks, Bobby.
Thanks, Bobby.
Michelle and Dave.
Kennedy, yeah.
Tēnā koutou, ko aia hau, he uri hau o ngā pui atu ko Ngāti Whanonga, ko Ngāti Maru, ko Rochelle Francis tōku moa. So I'm Rochelle, and I work for Healthy Families in Chicago, a team based in active Southland, and I facilitate the Murihiku Kai Collective. Just to say, my manager Wendy Finlay and our communications person Cass are both here as well. And thank you so much for having us. This is Dave Kennedy, who is a member of our Murihiku Kai Collective and Vice Chair of Farmers Markets New Zealand, also former chair of the Southern Farmers Market, and volunteer extraordinaire, so you'll probably see him around town. Do we have a presentation? Oh, here we go. Fantastic. Thank you.
You've got control of it now.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present back about our Good Food Roadmap mahi. All right, so in August this year, we facilitated a one-day co-design workshop with around 70 participants from across Murihiku Southland. So this included mana whenua, local food producers and suppliers, kaupapa Māori initiatives, social and health agencies, including Māori and Pacifica agencies and food relief, people working in education, social enterprise, SIT, environmental management tutors and students, community organisations, volunteers, Coin South, elected local government representatives and MP, local and regional council staff, garden to table, and people with lived experience of food poverty. So quite a range, and thank you to those of you who participated in that also. So we utilised the Good Food Roadmap strategic framework, which was developed by Healthy Families South Auckland and the Southern Initiative, and is now being adopted in various parts of Aotearoa, including recently by the, some local boards in the Auckland Council area. So I will circulate a copy of the full framework, including kind of explanation via email, but and I encourage you to take some time to explore it. It really helped to guide our kōrero in our co-design workshop by defining our desired future state in 5 key areas of focus. So in our co-design workshop, we began by asking people to share their vision for Murihiku Southland's food system, and some key themes emerged which we have summarised in this slide. In essence, participants wanted food to be affordable and accessible to our whole community whilst supporting the health of people and the planet and sustaining a strong local economy, which I'm sure you can all agree is a vision we can come behind. So participants spent some time exploring the burning issues in relation to our food system. It was clear that our community is very concerned about how difficult it is for people to access good food, and they believe that action is needed to address these problems. So burning issues that were raised in summary, the key themes: poor access and affordability of good food versus unhealthy fast food, food waste, lack of diversity in locally grown foods and the need for more growers, reliance on national and international distribution chains, which can fail, and the local food system trying to compete with the supermarket duopoly. Issues around land use, water, soil health, and escalating impacts of climate change, which were mentioned in the previous presentation, and a lack of regional strategy and collective approach to addressing these problems and the root causes. So just coming back to the Good Food Roadmap, we gathered, in our co-design workshop, we gathered participants around these 5 ideals. And these ideals are food equity, food sovereignty, food culture and traditions, food for health and wellbeing, and food resilience. The beauty of using this strategic framework is that everyone is able to locate themselves inside these 5 ideals, so they can see how their particular area of interest connects with the broad vision of a flourishing local food system. And the key takeaway is that each of these ideals needs to be worked towards in tandem as part of an overarching strategy and action plan in order to achieve our big picture goal. So in our breakout groups in the co-design workshop, our community members identified a range of strengths and resources that exist in our community to support restrain us in moving towards these 5 ideals. So once we had identified those resources and challenges, then we went into the fun part of the day. How might we? So workshop participants put forward a range of ideas to move us towards our desired future state. Here is a selection, kind of just described at quite a high level, and these participants chose to develop further on the day. And while they're still at a rough concept stage, I just wanted to share with you a little bit of detail because it's quite exciting. So one group refined their idea for a regional kai coordinator, similar to other roles that exist in parts of New Zealand, often sitting or supported by local government. This coordinator would help to connect and facilitate collaboration of people working in the food system in a region. And our participants saw this role as reporting to the Murihiku Kai Collective. An idea put forward by Zeb Horrell from Riversdale was to convert underutilised public spaces into permanent food production. Whilst this is by no means the first time this idea has come up, his ideas around methods and approaches were innovative, and he is trialling them in his part of the world, which is really important to be able to see what it looks like in practice. And idea that came up within a number of groups was around a food hub or food hubs. These are being used nationally and internationally to reinvigorate local food systems. They utilise economies of scale and alleviate challenges that small-scale producers commonly face, working on a principle of collaboration rather than competition. So that's just a brief taster. And you can see that our community really does hold the answers to rejuvenating our local food system. It's an absolute privilege to work alongside our community in this bold endeavour, and we'll continue to gather together to co-create this regional strategy. And we appreciate Southland District Council's support and would love to continue working alongside you. We are looking to produce a comprehensive document in the new year and come back to you to discuss in more detail what your support could look like. But in the meantime, I just wanted to update you and provide some food for thought and uplifting news to take into the Christmas period. So, ngā mihi.
Thank you very much. Councillor Byers feeds right into this, so are there any questions for Michelle Day?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks for your report today. I love that what they've got. Did you say Merv Horrell?
Zeb
Horrell. And I look at our open spaces, and a lot of them are mowed. But how do we attract the people to get them up and running, the Merv Horrells in communities? How do we communicate that out there? I look at some of our spaces in Winton and other towns. You know, how do we get the people? Put that question out to them to say, there's an opportunity here in this town. We need the volunteers. We need the people that are skilled around that. Have you got any thoughts about that? You know, when you look around Southland and where your gardens and where you're going, to attract people to start making these gardens and teaching people how to garden for food. And
did you want to speak to that, Dave?
I think it's really important that you do have conversations with local communities and just see who is interested, and then have some support if they don't have the skills. Because I think what can badly go wrong is if you donate a piece of land to a particular group and they don't manage it particularly well because the skills and support isn't there. So I think one of the things that's been really good about the Kai Collective is the kind of bringing together of a lots of different groups and sharing ideas. So there's a lot of knowledge within our community now that we would love to share with other groups. But I do think, you do have to have some people who are keen, and you do have to have some support in behind them to make sure that whatever starts can continue.
And I would just add to that, so the way that I guess my team works and the way that we work with the Murihiku Kai Collective is with a focus on capacity building and also collaboration that I guess fills those gaps in knowledge and skills that might exist through bringing in I guess our community leaders to in a very natural organic way, that tuakana taina, mentoring type thing happens inside of our collective. So the idea that was put forward around a regional Kai coordinator is very strong, because it helps to provide a contact point where those groups and individuals can come in, and then they can be connected with those models, those resources, those mentors, the support, and help to maintain that regional perspective, which is very important.
Yeah, you'll see the gaps. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Councillor Wilson. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Rochelle. Really cool. You mentioned in the 5 ideals the food resilience, and just wanted to know how you see the regional strategy fit into Southland adapting to climate change.
Yes, so that's a good question. Dave may want to speak to this as well, but just to mention that we presented to Environment Southland, the council meeting last week, and the question around the link between this mahi and climate change was raised, and the suggestion that food resilience should perhaps be one of the 4 areas of focus for the cross-council climate change mahi that is going to commence next year. That I guess the obviously there's the aspect, the environmental aspect in terms of food systems and land use and water, and anticipating the potential impacts of the change in climate on local food production. But it is also important not to just put food inside a little kind of climate change box, I guess, because we know that food links to community resilience, it links to the culture and tourism and vibrancy, and so it's a wider topic, I guess. But yes, very much needs to be a part of the work in relation to climate change and the natural environment. Yes. Did you have anything to add?
I don't know if anyone managed to read the article that Michael Fallow wrote. He interviewed me at length not so long ago, and there was an article in Stuff about should we start feeding ourselves again, because we've got a very much an export focus, and the big concern is that Southland exports almost everything that it produces. Nothing is retained in our local community. You won't find anything in the supermarkets that come from Southland farmers, or very little anyway. So that's an issue, and Farmers Markets New Zealand was wanting to get some research done through the MPI Food and Fibre Sustainability Fund. We just lacked, we haven't got a lot of resources ourselves, and we need to get some partners to help finance that research. But the idea is just to see what the gaps and opportunities are across all regions in the country. And we kind of feel that there's been a shift to the export market, which has meant that regions aren't celebrating what they can grow best, because the focus is on just a few items of like milk has been a big thing, and that's been a big thing in Southland, and we've forgotten that Southland's a great vegetable growing area. It's great for pip fruit, and so I think just to lead on to that, because we couldn't get this national study, Anna Palliser is going to be doing a Southland study that's kind of a pilot for the larger one, if we can get it off the ground. So she's going to do a kind of gaps and opportunities analysis of the Southland region, which would be really useful. So I think, we need to have that kind of information, but we also realise that we need to be a bit more resilient locally, because climate change impacts on the large growers who provide supermarkets at the moment. So in the article that Michael Fallow wrote, I mentioned the fact that we were even importing brassicas from Australia at one point, and when they had a bad season and lots of flooding, it impacted on the supply in New Zealand. When a major grower of onions or broccoli in New Zealand has a major weather event, there's a shortage of those items within their supermarkets, and there's a high cost, and prices go up. So that resilience thing is a really, really important thing, and I think we need to have that kind of view when we're developing future strategies for Southland. What are we doing to make sure that if the climate change is occurring, and if it's going to take out those major growers, how are we going to be able to feed ourselves? I think someone in Environment Southland mentioned there's 2 bridges between us and Christchurch, that if one of them washes out, the supply of food to the Southland supermarkets just doesn't occur, and we've got a 3-day sort of level of supply, and then we're going to be really struggling. So is that a good thing to be in?
Councillor O'Brien.
Through you, Your Worship. Ngā mihi, kia ora, congratulations for a start. I think you're on the cusp of realising something quite extraordinary, because what you're talking about inextricably links all of us, and that's food. And Southland is a province which prides itself on its food production. Something else that I'd like you to maybe think about or consider with some of the points you raised was maybe food proof and food commerce, because they're all linked to everything that you're talking about as well. Funnily enough, I had a chat to Cameron a week or so ago about the link between our cancer rates in Southland, rates of bowel cancer, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and so on and so forth. And the link between the health of our people and our diet and our lifestyle, once again, they're all linked together. The other thing that there's been a real push for, and I know Bobby just spoke before, and is the alternative land use that Southland in particular is looking at. We're all aware of the oat milk production, the hop production. There are examples of farmers who are using high rotation, no-till, no-spray methodology in order to be able to produce high-quality production that not only chefs and people within the tourism industry are using because they've got a longer shelf life, they taste better, they don't have to use dressings and so on, so the price, that they're basically saving money. So it stretches sort of not only within sort of, just trying to feed our people, our children and everyone else, but it goes through into tourism as well. So congratulations, well done on the work. I think one of your biggest challenges will be trying to buck the traditional trends that we have a little bit in Southland. But I can give you an assurance that some of the landowners and some of the people who have been involved in those traditional uses of land are receptive to diversification, and they are receptive to change. It's been happening basically in the farming industry for over 150 years in this country. So to keep up the good work, and by all means, I'm sure that councillors and staff will support you, because change is inevitable in this space in terms of that, in terms of what you're talking about. So well done.
So just talking too about sort of local food supply, Farmers Markets New Zealand is aware that in regions where councils are supportive of farmers markets or supporting local supply, that those markets thrive. And but a lot of farmers markets struggle because they have to shift. They don't have a supported site, and I mean the farmers market in Invercargill has had to shift to about 5 different sites, which is kind of disruptive and difficult to maintain a strong presence. There is concerns that the supermarket duopoly has kind of captured food production in New Zealand, and that's been identified in a recent study done by the Commerce Commission. And the suggestion is that another supermarket be started up as a competitor, and we see that as counterproductive because it just is focused on the same kind of wanting large suppliers and cheap supply and not recognising the value of local growers again. So if councils in Southland are supportive of supporting a local food growing culture, because it will need a culture change. People are used to going to supermarkets, so realising that local food tastes better and has high food value is really, really important. And if councils support that process, then it's more likely to be successful.
I think following on from that, in order to be able to achieve those things, there's 2 things that you've got to do. You've got to make it really easily accessible to the consumer, and that's what supermarkets do, right?
That's right.
They're a one-stop shop. And the other thing that you need to do is you need to make sure that the grower or the producer or the person who is engaged in that gets a really, really good return, because as you know, it's bloody hard work, and historically it's quite hard to get those returns.
So that's where the idea of that community food hub is really powerful, because that is helping to fill the gap, and I think that's why it's such a it's being taken up so widely as a model around Aotearoa and internationally. And I just wanted to, Mihi, to thank you very much for your encouragement, Councillor O'Brien, and to the whole of the Southland District Council. Just wanted to acknowledge the work of our Eat NZ kaitiaki in Southland. I don't know if you're aware of their mahi, but we've got 4 incredible kaitiaki in Southland. Catherine from Tiano, and who's associated with Fiordland Community Garden. There's Hayley in Anchorage down in Bluff. Ethan was one. I'm going to forget one person. Kate French is one of them. I believe there's one other person locally. It might actually be our Flour Bro sourdough maker, Britt. So, and also the work of the Southern Farmers Market to with their community produce stall that they started at the beginning of this year, which has really reinvigorated supply of locally grown produce to the Invercargill community this year. So, and yeah, very keen to make space to keep this conversation going, and so grateful to you for allowing us to take up so much of your time today in what I'm sure will be a very busy day for all of you. So, ngā mihi.
Did you have a question to speak?
Yes, I did. I just want to understand, do you also have some sort of simultaneously progress going on to developing indicators of, say, deprivation? How have you reached this state? Do we have something on that space? Because we can keep moving forward, but unless we realize why this need is there.
Yeah, so like I said, the Murihiku Kai Collective is facilitated currently by Healthy Families in Invercargill. So we came alongside and supported the establishment of the collective, and we're working to ensure that the collective can sort of become its own thing and stand on its own feet, so that our sort of backboning is not required in the future. But Healthy Families in Invercargill, we are a Ministry of Health funded national initiative that is based in 11 communities around Aotearoa, and Active Southland has an insights and evaluation team. We're constantly looking at the data and
benchmarking year on year as to where we are on this.
Yeah, and our mahi is targeted to communities of need, and so we bring that perspective and that data and information into the work of the collective as well. But the Murihiku Kai Collective is its work is a bit more kind of fluid and organic at the moment. It's an unincorporated kind of network, and so how they will work in terms of that side of things in the future, it's not up to me to say. But in terms of the work of my team and Active Southland, in terms of pursuing health and wellbeing outcomes for our community, that is something that we always look at. Yeah.
Following on from that, on a more practical level, I know you are for Southland, but do you have some sort of networks with, say, growers and pretty much next door Otago? And I ask for a specific reason. I know for a fact that I, in fact, was involved in that, like the Wanderwoods, the growers, apples and pears in Ettrick. They had been asking for people. They had 1,000 boxes, and each crate is 500 kgs. Apple rejects. They couldn't get anyone. Ultimately, it went to stock feed in Canterbury. But we couldn't find anyone to come and, and those sort of networks, that sort of practical, like that sheer wastage that went between pears and apples, and literally tons going. Do we have networks there? Because again, there'll be another. I know right now the growers there are emptying their freezer space, chiller space from last year for the current produce. There is still produce there going waste. Do we have networks there?
That was one of the reasons why we wanted to do this research with Country Farmers Markets New Zealand. But in trying to get that research over the line, we've actually starting to develop an MOU with Vegetables New Zealand, and Vegetables New Zealand have an overview of most of the growers around the country, but they lack local knowledge. So we're hoping to develop that kind of connection of if they got connections with some of the larger growers and we're operating at a more local level, then hopefully there's be some kind of symbiotic.
Yeah, I'm happy to help in that space wherever I can, because sometimes by the time we wait for this, much of that essence can be lost. All it takes is a drive through the central Otago, stopping at a few places and literally being able to do that.
Yeah, that's the point. Yeah.
I know that the Southern Farmers Market is working to try to establish those connections in order to step in and also facilitate supply of that food into our community. Yeah, and I know that Kiwi Harvest, who's set up in Invercargill in the last year and a half, they have also been. They have been involved in rescuing some of that produce from Otago.
I'm telling you about happened in this October and November, and they're still ongoing. So there is stuff that we can do immediately here.
Please do get in touch with us, and we'll see what we can support through the collective. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much again, and yeah, you probably see my photo and me sticking in that photo there. So I went to that workshop, and it was a really well run day, and there's some really great work. Keep it up. And
Sorry, real quick. Just want to follow up on something Margie said of how are these people in the community come up with great ideas, and you mentioned the Zeb Horrell. That's the Ardlussa Community Garden. Am I right with the polyculture? Right. Is it a chance that there's sometimes taking innovative ideas and then test casing it and taking it bigger picture? There's hurdles that as far as the process that you need to go through to expand on these ideas. Is there anything council can do to help people in the community with these great ideas to get it through to fruition on a bigger scale?
Absolutely. So I think the work that the collective's done and my team's done with the Invercargill City Council is a good example of that, and then providing space for us to test and trial different approaches. Sometimes, definitely supporting these activities through changes to policy and through getting resource available is very powerful, but that can take time, whereas just being prepared to experiment a little bit, fail fast, learn, fail fast, fail small, learn, and then identify the best way forward. Perhaps it might take just giving the relevant staff member permission to go outside of their kind of daily, their role description to be able to support something a bit different for a period of time that is just...
Yeah, removing barriers is a really important thing, because the Longwood Loop, you may have heard of the Longwood Loop, that's a project that's trying to connect small communities. I think there were a lot of regulatory kind of barriers to setting that up, and so they had to make some changes. I think there was work with this council, I think, to enable them to actually make that a success. And that is an issue, is that distribution element, that you can have a small grower operating somewhere, but the cost of getting to a major market to sell their produce is quite difficult. And there are some really successful businesses that I think make a good model. There's a guy, Brendan, who's based in Garston at Welcome Rock, who's got 1/4 acre. From that 1/4 acre, he's able to supply the Queenstown market, the Arrowtown market, restaurants in Queenstown. He does food boxes, and he even came down to Invercargill with some of his produce from just 1/4 acre. Very disciplined, but the knowledge that he's acquired on how to manage a small space and make it very productive is something that could be shared.
And I think as well, utilising the community boards and leveraging that and using those examples to show them what can be done. And I think getting at that level in the community is a very valuable way to do it as well. Well, thank you very much, and look forward to continuing the relationship.
Thank you.
Do we have Bridget? Welcome, Bridget.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I ro rangatira mā. Ngā mihi ki koutou. Ko Bridget Forsyth ahau, ke te kāhui ma te pukupuku ki o tākau me maraku ahau e mahi ana. Tūtahi. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge each and every one of you esteemed people here today, and thank you so much for the opportunity to present. I am Bridget Forsyth, and I represent the Cancer Society Otago Southland Division today, and I'm here to talk to you about some information I think we will have had sent to you, some of it, and I'm now getting the hard copies handed out. So councils are in a unique position to implement strategies that enable people to live healthy lives and lifestyles. For instance, we know that this council puts people before tobacco industry profits by supporting smoke-free environments. I'm really thrilled that you're reviewing your policy, and I've provided you some info that may be useful in that space. I will also be communicating with your policy staff with that as well. Today, however, I'm focused on a different harm and a different cancer. The harm is excessive UVR, ultraviolet radiation, and the cancer is skin cancer, which is actually our most common cancer. Shade is an important infrastructure issue if we want to turn the tide on skin cancer. We all know about the old slip, slop, slap and wrap, but slipping into shade is only an option if there is shade available. We're not suggesting that everything is covered, but we are asking that some built and natural shade is planned for and specifically funded for in upgrades for any play spaces. Aotearoa has the highest rate of death from melanoma in the world, and along with Australia, we have the highest incidence. kind of take turns at that, you know, winning at skin cancer, winning at melanoma, which is not really something we want to win at. Yet skin cancer is highly preventable. Over 90% of skin cancers are caused by too much sun. We do need sun, absolutely, but in New Zealand we just get too much. Here in the Southern District we have higher rates of melanoma than many of the other districts around the country. In 2019, for the age standardised rate per 100,000, we were the second highest in the country for melanoma. Playgrounds are available to all parts of the community and they're especially used by our children, which makes them a really great place to invest in some high quality shade. Sunburn at any age increases the risk of melanoma, but sunburn is particularly risky during childhood. The more sunburns, the greater the risk. Our UV environment from September through to the end of March is high enough most days to cause people with fair skin, skin damage for people with fair skin in Southland. UV peaks in January, and we know this because NIWA have provided us with 10 years of UV index data. The UV index is a measure that the World Health Organization have developed. I've provided you on that, as you see. And the World Health Organization, recommends sun protection when the UV is 3 and above. This map shows that Southland has about 3 months each year, it's 104 days, where the UVI is 6, which is high and above. And we have on average 57 days where it is at or above 8, which is very high, and about a week when the UVI is 11 or above, which is extreme. UV radiation increases as you get closer to the equator. So other councils can be a bit ahead of us in terms of shade provision, partly because we don't actually use shade here to cool us down like people do in some parts of the country. What people don't realise is that unlike the light that we see and the heat that we can feel, we can't actually see or feel UVR. So heat and UV are actually two completely different things. They're different parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. That's why on cooler, cloudy days we can still get sunburnt. In fact, today is a good example. The peak UV for today is 10, and remember I said 8 was very high, so 10 is in that middle of that very high range, and 11 is when it gets to extreme. So the peak for today is 10.8. If the clouds do persist throughout the day, then it will still be 7.7, so that's still high. So you can still go outside and get sunburnt today, even get sun damage today, even though it's not a massively warm day and it's pretty cloudy. You can check the UV index anytime. NIWA provides data for the app UVNZ, and I definitely recommend that. It's a good way to go, oh gosh, it is high today. So appropriate shade in Southland will make outdoor spaces comfortable to use in all seasons. It may even extend the use of playground equipment beyond the summer months by providing shelter from the rain. It can be aesthetically pleasing, it's an equitable form of sun protection, and will provide protection for generations to come. Strategically planted trees can also be a great option, but it's usually good with a combination of both built and natural shade. UV radiation can reach the person on the ground directly from the sun, but it can also be scattered from the sky and reflected by surfaces. A good quality shade has the potential to significantly reduce UV exposure, both direct and indirect. We don't think the public should have to choose between shade and play equipment in a country with highest rates of skin cancer in the world. Many of our schools are sun smart, which is fabulous, and many people look after their kids with sun protection. So if we could have a little more shade a place where our children congregate, we'd reduce overall UV exposure. UV damage builds up over a lifetime, and the damage we do in childhood remains with us. It changes our DNA. It causes about 90,000 non-melanoma skin cancers every year, in addition to the melanoma I mentioned earlier, and they all need treating. It's a massive burden on our health system. It takes away dollars from other areas we could be investing in health-wise. 181 million annually in direct costs to the public health system, and it's projected to increase to 295 million by 2025. As I say, that takes away from other areas we could be directing health funding to. But this cost doesn't actually take into account the suffering, both physical and mental, that it causes to people in our community when they have to deal with the trauma of going through skin cancer. Together with the ECC playing their part, we can turn the tide on skin cancer. Finally, we've provided you with a sun hat to go with the information provided, and I've emailed the digital versions of the handouts. Yes, thank you.
At the end of the meeting.
Cool. So I've emailed digital versions of the video, and I forgot to send this the other day, but there's also a link to a nifty video I wanted to share that the New South Wales Cancer Institute developed, which is a visualisation of the unseen and unfelt UV, and it's just really can help with get that message across. So thank you so much for your time today. I'm happy to hear any questions, answer them. Ngā mihi nui.
Thank you very much for the presentation and an opportune time. It doesn't feel like summer yet, but it's just around the corner. And,
we get them days occasionally, don't we?
Do we have any questions for Bridget?
Thanks, Bridget. I've come from an outdoors industry background and understand that there's quite a lot of technological advances in the likes of UPF clothing, and a lot of schools taking that approach, looking at uniforms and things. And as a council, we have a lot of contractors out in the open spaces, lawn mowing, that type of thing. How does, I guess, UV protection fall into the health and safety space?
It is part of the health and safety space. I know in Australia, for instance, they actually have some companies being sued for not protecting their workers enough. In New Zealand, we have ACC, so it doesn't quite work the same way, but it's definitely part of health and safety. If you look on like WorkSafe and stuff, they have recommendations for it, and the Cancer Society has information about it too. But yeah, that's an area that my colleagues have worked on, and I can definitely get more info about, you know, claims to ACC and things like that they're looking at. But like, for instance, what you're wearing today is a brilliant SunSmart example. Like, it's long sleeve and shirt sleeves and stuff like that with the collar. But yeah, there's been some great equipment out there, and it would be great if all of the contractors and stuff are provided by the employer with really good sun protection. I think people rely too much on sunscreen, and it's really tricky to use really well. It's not just, oh, splash on a tiny bit of sunscreen and I'm a superhero for the day. People use it incorrectly all the time. Like, I sort of say to kids, am I wearing a shirt? And they go, yes. And I go, and am I wearing sunscreen? And they look panicked because you cannot tell if I'm wearing sunscreen, and I can't tell if I've missed a patch. And you need to reapply every 2 hours. You need to put it on 20 minutes beforehand, and then ideally immediately before going into the sun, and then reapply it if you sweat or rubbed it with clothing, if you go into water, even if it's waterproof. So yeah, definitely UPF.
There's some scope for education in there anyway.
Yeah, and I'm super keen to talk to any of your work teams about it. Definitely, love it.
Like, especially the events that are happening with the rodeos and the Gibson Valley concerts and all those sorts of things, where people tend to totally forget about that until the next day. And
yeah. Well, sunburn doesn't sort of show up. Like, you can get the skin damage and you don't notice it until kind of the sun sets, and then you go, gosh, I'm a bit warm. But it's also a bit tricky because, like, it's cumulative. So if you got, you know, half your sun exposure thing one day and then went out the next day and got half again, then that adds to that damage because you haven't had time to repair the DNA. So yeah.
Questions?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Bridget. You skipped across trees pretty quick.
Yeah.
You seem to be leaning towards built.
I'm very keen for trees. The thing with trees is that we do need to do them quite strategically. So you can't just have one tree over here and the playground equipment over here. It's not going to cast any shade on it. You kind of need to have 3 trees planted together so that their foliage creates that good shade and reflection and stuff. It's a bit complicated. To get shade right, you need to get some really good advice around that. So trees are fabulous, and I encourage more of them, but I know that lots of places, lots of schools have had to take trees out for fear of them falling on children and killing them, you know. We don't want that either. Or not killing people. So yeah, trees. And your planting strategies and stuff like that. I would love shade trees to be incorporated, and to get some good advice about that clustering and stuff like that would be absolutely fantastic. But I mean, built shade is part of the picture too. I mean, personally, I'm a big fan of trees because they sort of feel a bit more sustainable. Whereas with the built shade, you know, it often needs upgrading and replacing, and you need to get stuff that's not going to be damaged by the wind or something like that. Like we have schools in town who just can't have shade sales because, well, one, wind, but two, vandalism, you know. But yeah, are you a tree world person?
I think everyone likes trees, don't they? They don't have to be big trees, do they? They can be little ones. Ko-fi trees don't get too big.
Korwai, yeah. They can do some, yeah, there's some good natives that can do some good breeds and stuff. Yeah, we can definitely give you some info on that, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bridget. No, thanks, Doc. So we've got a recommendation there that we acknowledge the attendance of representatives from Beyond 2025, the Mirahuku Kai and the Cancer Society. Would someone like to move? Councillor Wilson, Councillor Fagan, all in favour? I doubt anyone will be against. Carried. Thank you very much, Bridget. And,
well, thank you so much.
We'll break for morning tea, and you're welcome to stay for morning tea as well.
Oh, let's do it now.
This will take the item off the hub.
It's going to be a quiz on the 245-page report.
I didn't see them last night. I saw them this morning.
I'm going to pop the Christmas glasses on because I'm bringing you all something extra to read over Christmas. So, kia ora, my name's Robin, and I'm just presenting the extraordinary report around receiving the documents titled Future for Local Government, He Mata Whare Ki He Mata Wanui, which was dated October this year, and the Taitora briefing document, which came out in December. So, as I said, in October, the draft report, which is quite lengthy on the local government reform, has been released. He mata whare ki he mata whanui. It outlines the need for local government or local governance system in Aotearoa that's community focused, citizen centred, and based on strong relationships and partnerships. And the report invites further discussion and submissions to help the review panel shape their final report and recommendations, and I believe that'll be due later on next year. Staff have read through this report, and we've kind of done a lot of talking together around that draft report. We've discussed it at a local and a regional authority level to gauge the initial responses from staff in that level. Taitora have provided 2 online webinars on the draft report, which has been attended by staff, and Taitora have also put out the briefing paper, which is the other attachment to this. The report contains these 2 attachments, and submissions on the draft report are now open until the 28th of February 2023. So the next steps that we're going to take is Chris and I are going to work with Council in January to determine your responses to the draft report, if any, and around some submissions. So we're just asking today that you receive these 2 reports, and that then we can come back and do some work around those submissions. Thank you.
Thank you. And I guess the key point to note, must be the end of the year, to note is that we've got the Future for Local Government panel coming in at the end of February into Southland. So we've got this time today to ask any questions. It's going to feed into the January meeting as well, and then the Future for Local Government panel will actually come into Southland as well. So there's a multi-staged approach. After that, are there any questions?
Sure. Thanks, Robin. You mentioned the staff and met at a regional authority level. What authorities are those?
Through your worship, we were doing some work
alongside ICC, the Queenstown Lakes through there.
Yeah, through your worship, it's at Otago, Southland, so inclusive of Waitaki.
You'll note that there's certain things in the report that they, even in the 245 pages, they haven't covered, and the key themes of the lots of amalgamation and all those sorts of things, so they've left all of that out in the open for discussion. So it's going to be interesting to see where the discussion sort of leads to, and hopefully we get a good turnout for the 10th of February from people outside of local government as well, because I think part of getting good information in that is all the people that aren't in the room actually feeding in to make local government as relevant as possible. So we need to encourage anyone that's showing an interest in it, encourage them to come along in February as well and hear from and speak to that panel. I think those workshops are a good two-way street. It's not just getting talked down to from the panel, it's actually a two-way street.
Through your worship, I think this probably would be a report that would be useful to have a hard copy of.
Yeah. The future for local government.
Yeah.
Actually, through your worship, I was thinking about what Sarah just said, you know, good to have a hard copy of this, and I know that from time to time we get these reports sort of at the 11th hour. It's a 245 page report. I think I got to page 28 last night. And I was thinking about it when I was driving down, you know, when I come to council meetings, you know, it's a 3-hour return trip. I thought to myself, audiobooks, wouldn't it be great if we could convert some of these files into audiobooks? You know, whether you're driving or whether you're going for a walk, sitting on a track or doing whatever you're doing. Because I can give you an assurance, I would listen to the whole thing if it was, you know, available in that format. So I don't know, it's just a passing comment. I know hard copy and this copy, but is it something that the council may consider for these files?
I mean, I've had the same thought myself with listening to agendas while you're working, while you're driving. We all spend a lot of time on the road, so I think it'll be a valuable use of that time. And I mean, this report, it did come out in October, and it was just getting this into the meeting to generate the discussion, so you weren't expected to read it all cover to cover last night. But, I do think getting a hard copy to anyone that wants it, just let us know. We can.
Tell me now if you want a hard copy, because I'll print them off and put them in the post to you. Who else did I see hands go up? Right down. What else? Yep.
And maybe the Chamberlain as well.
Yeah.
Councillor Keys, did you?
So I did, and wholeheartedly support that idea of getting audio books for a lot of our stuff, so that would utilise their driving time and other times when they're not attached to visual devices. This report, in defence of staff, this report has been circulating for some time, and we probably do have many copies of it. So, but it is good to have a report to give it a little bit.
Sorry, through your worship, just following on from that too, I guess the other thing will be who's going to be the lucky person to narrate and put these reports onto into audio format. And I was thinking that maybe, I don't know, like someone who is studying political science or something like that, you know, maybe it's a paid position on an hourly rate to be able to actually put that onto an audio format. I don't know. I mean,
technology might actually be there to automatically read it out. You might get a bit of a sat-nav type voice, but
I don't know. I'm trying to think of the practical.
Just carrying on. Just wondering if the webinars, the format of the webinars was actually, I had trouble with both of them actually connecting, so I didn't actually get to participate, but wondered if there was any information in them that was worthwhile with the recording of the discussion or in any way, shape or form.
Through your worship, there is a copy of the webinars. Our Legal and Governance Manager has those. I'd also suggest the Tautura briefing paper is a pretty good representation of the 3 hours of that webinar, so pretty succinctly put.
Councillor Menzies.
Thank you. I think it's probably a worthwhile suggestion to take through LGNZ nationally, because it's about everybody who have issues or difficulties in being able to read or hear or hear. I suppose it's they can convert it to a format that might be suitable for them as well. So all our government departments who are writing reports could perhaps put it into an audio file rather than looking at that at local government level.
Yeah, very valuable. If it's good for us, it's good for everyone, sort of thing, and then let's not double handle. Any other discussion or questions on that report? No, I think for me, I've said it before and I'll say it again, but I think irrespective of where this lands, I think we've got the opportunity to drive Southland's version of the future for local government, and I think there's no point in waiting to hear back from all this panel for whenever that may actually happen. I think we still need to sort of press on and have that in the back of our minds, how we're progressing and how we are doing things. And I think this is a really good example of just what's come up now about actually doing things differently with the agenda, making it easier to do business and more attractive for people as well. So I think it's a really good discussion. No other questions?
I make one comment, please. Just a little bit of awareness, I guess, for the elected members. Michelle, this is Michelle's last week this week, so we will be in a recruitment phase, and over the January-February process, we will be a little bit short-staffed, obviously, in our strategy and policy team. Simon is, I think, hiding in the corner over there. He will also be helping with the submission on this, but once again, that is at the detriment of other pieces of workload. So it would be great if, while you're doing your Christmas reading, 280 pages or something, if you were thinking about particular areas that you'd really like us to focus in on, assuming that other councils will be focusing on the document obviously as well, but if there's particular areas which you'd like us to focus more on, that may give us a better chance of making a really solid submission given our resourcing issues as well. So I just want to make that point.
That's right. Councillor Wilson.
Is this information and report going through to community boards as well? Knowing that the panel, except for Lumsden, is all elected members invited? Will they have that information?
Yep, at the very least, an email will be going out. The meetings may not fit before, but yeah, the communication around notifying that that's happening is.
Were there formal inputs into this report? Because we talk again and again about the fact that speaking to members or listening. So when they call it a provocation, but when this was created, did they have some sort of formal inputs into this? Into this report?
This report?
Yeah. Because they say when we speak to local government members, this is what we found and this is what we are. Or are they talking about a more generic discussions coming over a period of time?
Sorry, just
So what I mean was, were there any focused workshops or something to feed this report?
The 240-page report. Sorry, yeah, I thought you meant this report that we're looking at now. Sorry. Yeah, so that LGNZ and the local government panel have been working sort of independently of each other, but around the country using. LGNZ have done a lot of workshops themselves. Webinars, yeah, and those we should have access to see. And then the panel itself has been doing a lot of work up and down the country, talking to people and interacting and engaging with a lot of stakeholders. Hasn't spent much time down. They came down to Southland 3 years ago.
Okay.
Didn't spend too much time down here. It was quite quick. We did a presentation to them, which we can probably get a copy of too for the new councillors.
Yes, there's some documents that input.
So that was during lockdown, wasn't it? That we did that presentation. Yeah. So it was a Zoom presentation where we sort of showed them the Southland way of doing things and what works well and that sort of thing. So
yes, please, a copy of that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor
Your Worship, thank you. Thank you for your report today. I have my hard copy, but to make a comment and wish you all the best, Michelle, for your new career, and a Merry Christmas to everybody, and you will leave a hole in this organisation. So all the best.
Thank you, Michelle, as well. Nothing further? Cool. Thank you very much. So we've got, up behind me there, we've got recommendation A through to D, and D is new, that that's going to be considered further at the meeting on the 25th of January. For someone in a position to move A through to D? Thank you, Councillor Butterfly. Seconded, Councillor Keith. All in favour?
Aye.
Anyone against? Carried. Right, we have the forestry guys coming in about 9 minutes, but let's see if we can rearrange them to cover off in the meantime. Unless we want to talk about local government.
Cover off the meeting
Meeting,
schedule.
yep, we'll move to 9.2, the meeting schedule. And I believe Fiona's going to talk to us.
It's the meeting schedule for the remainder of, from in April 2023 to the end of next year.
Page 43.
Page 41 of the agenda. Got a few finance and assurance committee meetings in there as well, and that's where I'm going to leave it.
Short and sharp. Are there any questions for Fiona on that, or any feedback?
Thanks, Rob. I just want to, if I'm right from standing orders, there's a limit of how long a meeting can go on for. The reason I ask is the Adlasa Community Board's just confirmed all the ongoing meetings, and they're on a Wednesday as well, so just want to make sure there's ample time to get between council meetings to potentially Waikaia. What would be the latest one of these meetings?
I mean, it's hard to, depending on the nature of what's going on, but I mean, standing orders is 6 hours, but you can extend that with the group's approval. But I think taking on board, we'll know in advance when those meetings are, and we can structure the council meetings around that as well, so as not to put, if we've got with the fortnightly meetings, we'll be able to hopefully streamline it so that we're not, because you're conscious that you've got to drive all the way back to potentially Waikaia for that as well. So.
Mr. Beer's meeting meetings every 3 weeks. Like if there was something that was going to be taking a bit of time, you can always adjourn today's council meeting to pick up in 2 weeks' time. Saves on paper.
We all like. Cool. So, someone like to move? We've got, I think, A through to D on that one as well. Councillor Menzies, second by Councillor Ruttenclaw. All in favour? Anyone against? Carried. Right. I believe the forestry people might be here. Cool. So we'll go to the next item on the agenda, which is the forestry report, which was in public included, which is now in.
Sorry?
Page 47 of your agenda.
Yeah, I'll agree. I'll hand over to you, please.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon, councillors. Presenting the commercial strategy for forestry management. Continuing on from the last council meeting. Today, I've got with me the OIS team. It's important for them here to allow us to present the detail behind that strategy so that you can really understand the embedded commercial reasoning behind moving towards and transitioning to a strategy that has a balanced approach and is returning the greatest net return to our ratepayers. So to my left here is Dan Minahan, and he's the Director of IFS. Anton Ridley, who's the South Island General Manager, and Reese McKenzie, who's our Operations Manager for Southland. There's no doubt that they are leading the forestry industry regionally, and they've also got a significant amount of national recognition in their way that they operate and conduct their business. But I'm going to hand over to Dan to perhaps give a little bit of that context and then lead into how the forestry strategy that is presented is going to work. for ratepayers and for council in general.
Thanks, Stuart. Hello, everybody. There's a lot of new faces that we haven't met before, so thanks very much for having us. Just on that, because we haven't talked before, just a little bit of background. So IFS Growth is a forest management business. We have a number of offices around New Zealand. But with the context of today, it's really to discuss where we fit into the Southland Otago market. So we have an office about 400 metres down the road. There's 12 of us in there. Forest managers run the accounts for our region. Anton runs our region. Reese is our chief operations silviculture forest manager. To put us into context, Southland cuts about 1 million tonne of wood per annum, of which we cut about 300,000. Of the new plant, and it's quite topical at the moment, of bare land planting in Southland Otago, we probably planted about half it last year. So that gives us an idea. We've been managing and working with the STC now for about 10 years. Reese was saying on the way over, this is our third management plan we've done for you guys, so it kind of puts everything into context, I think. Particularly, do you want to move on to some points?
Yes, Stephen. Dan, thanks for that context. Dan, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what's involved in that strategy, and we've got some considerations to a pruning regime and a sawlog regime, and how our stock is best to be utilised in both of those. There was a real discussion around having a balanced approach to the forestry portfolio in the last discussion. Embedded in the strategy is a balanced approach that's really talking to the quality of the stock that's there. So some may remain pruning, some will be unpruned, and that is to maximise the value of each area and stock that we have. So Dan, do you want to further that into context of what the market is doing as well, and the rest of the forestry industry?
Yeah. So I've kind of broken pruning versus non-pruning into 3 or 4 aspects, and the fundamental changes that have been happening for probably 6 or 8 years, but also some things that are emerging along with things that have occurred in the last few years. We've got 2 main mills in Southland, and they're now owned by one owner. So Niagara and Craigpine. Niagara spent a significant amount of investment on remanufacturing. So remanufacturing in terms of lumber is taking sawn timber and further processing it. One of their key functions is finger joining. So if you could imagine a log is sawn, you've got knots, clear wood, knots, clear wood, knots, clear wood. They'll cut the knots out and glue those boards back together. And that's becoming more and more prevalent going forward. So the demand on pruned timber, pruned log, is getting significantly less in the Southland domestic market situation as the increased processing investment takes place. Over the last period, we've seen the net price of pruned actually decrease in relative terms to knotty grade in the Southland market. So that's one of the factors we're looking at. Another market that we're looking that is emerging, and it's emerging quite fast too, is actually the biofuel market. We've all sort of read about that and kind of understand that to a point. So to put that into context, we probably think in the next 3 or 4 years, of the 1 million tonne that's currently harvested in Southland, potentially up to 400,000 tonnes of that will be used to fuel what's now currently used for coal boilers. Now, the size of the log, the quality of the log and everything that goes in to make it piece of wood chip to create wood energy or biofuel is it doesn't really matter. So at this point, one of the key strategies is to grow volume. So we now go back to a prune stand. A prune stand, we spend the money pruning the log, and just touching on that, the cost of pruning now is triple what it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, even when we did the last management plan 5 years ago, costs have gone up over 30%. Most of that's probably in pruning labour.
So it's a bit like what the shearers are seeing or the farmers are seeing in Southland around the shearing. And at that point, once you commit to pruning a log, you really need to grow it out to get where the logs are graded on knot size and small end diameter. So small end diameter of the log, obviously the log's fatter at the bottom of the tree. And so we have to thin the forest to around 350, 370 stems per hectare to allow those trees to grow fat enough to reach that prune grade and capture that investment. And there's a whole lot of things that can go wrong on the way through there. The stem isn't straight enough. We get a snow event. It blows over. Those are some of the additional risks of putting more investment into each tree. So at 350 stems per hectare, let's just call it on an average site, you'll grow 550 tonnes of wood at age 26, 27, 28. What we're suggesting is to go to a saw log regime where we're thinning the forest to 550 stems per hectare, so we're running more stems to the hectare, but we're capturing about 20% more volume per hectare. So when we go to harvest, we're not actually getting as high as per tonne rate, so 500 tonne times the number. We're getting a lesser rate, but we're running greater tonnes. I think those greater tonnes will hold us in better stead, particularly with the biofuel. It'll give us options for production thinning. It'll give us greater volume. The other thing about taking over a framing regime is the harvest window's greater. When I talk about the harvest window in a prune stand, you have to wait till you have your small end diameter of your prune logs about 40 centimetres. But when we start talking knotty logs, the small end diameter only has to be 30 centimetres. So from any time on, depending on market forces, it gives us, so we work with the likes of Stu on this, our harvest window really opens up for a prune stand about age 27 or 28 years old. But our harvest window potentially on a knotty log regime can start from 22, 23 on. Now, I'm not saying we go and cut our wood young, but we've got significantly more options moving forward. To also talk about what other people are doing, there's one forest owner I'm sure you've heard of, Matariki Rainier. They're using a non-prune regime now. And also from a company's perspective, to put our money where our mouth is, we've got shares in a few thousand hectares now, and we're running a non-prune regime as well.
Excellent, Dan, thanks. So I guess that key messaging is that following that non-pruning regime, we're seeing a lot more resilience actually in the portfolio to adapt to the market condition, to optimise the stock that's there, and essentially have the greatest capacity to provide the greatest net return to council in relation to that forestry portfolio. So it also enables us to adapt to the biofuels market and engage in that. It's quite a significant aspect. So we think we've got this strategy in a very good position, and we're wishing to go forward with that. Is there any questions that we can answer directly?
Thank you, Bishop. It's not directly relating to the strategy, but indirectly. I don't know whether there's been issues around recruiting people to be able to do the pruning, and if not, will there be an impact I guess, on employment rates in Southland if we change to this strategy?
I wouldn't think, it certainly wouldn't be significant. We use the same crews for planting that are used for silviculture that are used for thinning. We've seen an increase in the pruning, and the planting, sorry. So for however long that goes for, all the slack in the system is taken up. In fact, most crews are actually actively recruiting offshore labour.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think you've explained the situation very well. Just a couple of questions. One is about our agility if the situation changes. Does it take much to sort of change tack?
It doesn't, but we just got to remember all the pruning's to finish by year 10.
Yeah.
So we would be in a late teen lag for sure.
And the other one, is there any downsides about the more dense planting? Like, does it leave it more susceptible to perhaps viruses or?
Not really. We don't really have any known pathogens killing our older stands.
I know there are in Canada.
Yeah, absolutely.
Places, but we're free of them.
Europe's been hit badly.
So is that about biosecurity or what?
Yeah, absolutely.
What's saving us there?
Yeah, their borders.
The people who are policing the borders know that.
They talk about it, so.
Good. We talk about a lot of things. Thank you.
Through your worship, with regards to the conversion of that, I guess, dry matter into biofuel, do you have some dialogue or figures or data around that conversion in terms of the cost or the infrastructure associated with that? Is it a relatively straightforward process?
Yes, it is. We'd have to pick an age for the density of the timber and the stocking and all the rest of it, but we'd be more than happy to put some work to that if that's what you'd like to see. And we think the price will be paid for the log of biofuel will be directly related to the price of carbon because the coal substitution. And if you're burning coal, you're paying X amount of tonne per tonne of coal of carbon. So we think it's kind of aligning where things are going.
So following on from that conversion from coal to wood, I guess sort of addressing some of the risks again. I understand Matara Valley Milk have just converted to electric.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any risks associated with, I guess, the cost and the benefit analysis between conversion of wood or using wood production versus electricity?
I think it's more around giving confidence to the consumer, i.e. your industrial consumer, that the wood's there. Forest owners are paying attention and see it as a long-term, there's a lot of demand there. But I think the risk is giving those guys confidence that the timber's going to be there in the future for them to burn. So, as a group of decision makers, having even you guys coming out and saying you're prepared to entertain using your forest for some of this, which I think is good from a Southland perspective for recarbon and all the rest of it. That's just another tick in the box to take that strategy forward.
Your Worship, thank you for this. You have explained it very well. I'm wondering if the increase in density of the sticks over the hectare, does that have an effect come harvest time on possible risk around erosion and environmental issues? Because we've seen some issues.
No, this is good. This is a good question. I think there's been a lot of very, very broad statements, and I'm highly passionate about this, by the way, around the downsides of afforestation, new forests, and the management of current forests. I think the paintbrush in New Zealand's been about this wide, and I've just looked at across every province in New Zealand. We certainly know, as a company spread out across New Zealand, where these issues lie. As far as erosion goes, we really don't have any erosion problems in Southland. Our soils are very stable. Those, as far as risks go, are not, provided it's managed properly. We keep the water, the logs away from the waterways, we pull away and all the rest of it. That's as far as sedimentation into waterways, but we have, if we own forests in Gisborne and we were having a conversation around erosion, I think it would be the number one thing you'd be talking about, absolutely. But there's a whole lot of risks that get talked about in general in forestry in New Zealand that just simply don't apply here in Southland. If you go around and look at your forests, you start looking at dipped-in forests. It's just pretty gentle contour, you know. Nothing that livestock farmers aren't already basically running crops on, you know. Ojai's basically flat. An answer, I probably haven't explained that overly well, but the answer is no. I just don't feel there's a risk because of our soil types.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
Councillor Duffy?
Are there better, thinking about the biomass for boilers, is there other varieties that might have a more intense heat that we perhaps could be growing instead of pine?
I've talked to Anton about this a few times about eucalypt, but Anton won't let me plant it. It comes with other associated risks.
He's a good man.
So as far as density goes, that would be the pick, but very tricky. It's a tricky thing. Other things can go wrong. You need very good sites, you know. And Radiata's been getting a bagging in the last year or two, but it's actually an amazing tree. Its resilience, its capability, its growth. It's sort of something that should be cherished, not kind of
Macrocarpa, while it burns well, a bit too slow growing.
Too slow growing, yeah.
Councillor Blackroy?
If I may, you spoke about 1 million tonnes and 40% that could be likely be going for boilers. What in the future, what percentage is it currently that's being used? Which biomass currently?
I'd say it's about 100,000.
So 10% currently of our annual cut.
Yeah.
And to add on to Councillor Down's question, when we talk about going from 350 stems per hectare to 550, what is the effect on water, do we know?
Water quality?
Both. Quality, quantity.
No difference in water quality.
Okay.
Water quantity?
Mm-hmm.
I'd say the denser stems will hold back higher rainfall events.
Mm-hmm.
It'll act as a buffer.
Right.
Will that stand use more water? Probably in relation to the amount more volume we've grown. Maybe that stand will use, if we're growing 20% more volume of timber, it'll probably use 20% more water.
And have we any future, predictions of this, and how resilient are we to be able to have that kind of growth? No issues with the water?
No issues. Like Southland's got a very reliable rainfall. If we were talking in Marlborough, you can only run so many stems to the hectare because the site runs between the soil and the water. The site actually runs out of grunt, and your forest will stall in the future. But down here, we're running pretty heavy soils and pretty good average rainfall.
Right.
Most of your forests will be in the metre plus category.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'll just ask a question on behalf of the councillor who's not here, but he asked it last time around the sort of balanced approach and that almost supply and demand type setup where you get a whole lot of, everyone sort of follows the framing route, and does that actually create a demand for the prune stuff later on down the track? So I guess two questions, how much of a balanced approach have we got to be able to cater to that side of it, and do you see that as a potential opportunity that we're missing out on?
Okay, so if I just pass it over, so from a percentage of prone, I'll just let Anton and Reece speak to that, what they've put in their report, and I'll just speak to the higher level if you like.
So yeah, it wasn't actually in the report, but we worked the figures out this morning of what percentage pruned is currently on the estate. of the pines, and there's close to 600 hectares is pruned, which is about 40% of the Pinus radiata. So, I mean, you've still got, I mean, that's pruned from about 1992 through to probably the age 10 now. So you've got that sort of age group, which is about 20 years with the prunes in there.
But with the question being asked, if we stop pruning per se, will that open up a niche market for the pruned in the future? That's the question you're asking.
The glut of one.
And I'm missing out on a potential opportunity there.
Yeah, well, but I just don't know where the answer to that question lays, to be honest, because the less processing of pruned there is, the less the market becomes relevant to that. You said no. I just don't think you could quantify that. I think if that was a really relevant topic at this table, at a high level, it's very difficult to put numbers. We can't put numbers and cents to that. But we could continue with the highest growth portions of your forest, say take 100 hectares or something, and carry on. That's no problem at all. So if you wanted to keep it a bit balanced, yeah. But we'd just target the very best stuff.
Thank you.
Sorry, Anton.
I just guess the risk is that you could be sitting there with a niche product, but if all the processors have set themselves up to process, sawlog, knotty wood, then it's not going to get that premium for it.
And it's still costing you to maintain.
We see that in Douglas fir at the moment. Some private growers will prune their Douglas fir. They'll prune their macrocarpa, and we don't have a prune market for either of those. And they get grumpy why they've spent their money and we can't give them any more.
Thanks, Rob. This has been a crash course into commercial forestry for me. I appreciate your time. One of the I guess, hot topics, although it's not really a hot topic, it's been around all my life, but climate change is a big factor, and you mentioned, I guess, the factor of Southland average rainfall at the moment. When you're doing modelling, you're assessing markets and what may happen in the market. Is there any modelling taking into account NIWA data or what affects climate change or long-term investments like this may affect some of those ongoing costs if rainfall or lack of rainfall comes into the picture over a long investment like this? How are those factors mitigated in the forestry plan?
We haven't looked, to be honest, we haven't looked to address that.
It's a hard thing to crystal ball.
Yeah, well, I think, I'm not sure, as a group of leaders, I'm sure you could probably come back to us and tell us what you think the weather's going to do in the future, and we could do something with that. But at the moment, I don't know, to be honest. We haven't modelled it. But it is a valid point. I think it's a very valid point for the likes of Marlborough, Canterbury, Hawke's Bay, based on my knowledge.
Why so those regions?
I just think some of those regions will end up dry.
Sorry, I didn't think of this before, but with that increased density and say over a period of 3 or 4 cycles, does the soil become depleted? Is there nutrient loss, or does the pine needle fall make up for that? Or?
Yeah, no, well, there's forests on its 4th rotation that are unfertilised now.
You're fertilising them?
No, they're unfertilised.
Do you monitor it?
We'll see. We'll do health tests. You guys are part of the Forest Owners Association, and there's a health guy come through and drive through the forest every year to have a look. But we look for discoloration of the needles and things like that. But there is a bunch of forests now on their 3rd rotation in Southland, 4th and 5th in Kyangaroa and Kinleith, that are not being fertilised.
And do you know what the perfect optimum pH and nutrient levels are for healthy pine tree growth?
they're very, very adaptable. Like in the second and third rotation, the pH of that soil will be probably low 5s. If you're doing afforestation projects on new planting sites, ex-farmland, those forests are then growing probably 6, 6.1, 6.2. And over the course of the multi-rotation, that pH will come down more to what a native forest pH would look like. It kind of stabilises the soil. A lot of things we see in the second rotation is the soil is much more friable. It hasn't had the compaction, hasn't had the nitrogen added, and massive amount of mycorrhiza running through the soil. It kind of creates its own environment. So there is some fertiliser in New Zealand. In Northland, we work with some customers up there. They're on the sand. Their second and third rotations do need something just to kick them along a bit, but we're not doing anything in Southland.
Through your worship. Dan, regarding the greater stems per hectare, and when those trees get to a point where they start coning and producing more, I'm presuming they produce more seedlings.
Yeah.
More
seed.
Yeah, more seed.
Yep.
Have you made provision or thought of the implications of that with regards to wilding spread?
Well, that's another very good subject. Yep. Again, going back to that paintbrush that's about that wide, there's no question that forest seed, there's no questions that species have differing ability to seed and spread based on that on the wingspan of the cone. But it needs to be put into the context of where that tree is planted.
Right tree, right place.
Yeah, pretty much. If you went and put, we've seen, South has probably got the greatest example of wilding spread at Mid-Dome, or on the Queenstown Hills. Wrong tree, put on a hill, no grazing pressure around it, all the rest of it. Like, there's no doubt that our forests, or the SDC forests, are dropping seeds. Most of, I'd almost say, all the land surrounding the SDC's forest is either other forests, or it's very intensively grazed, or it's worked every 8 years or something. So anything that does arise, it just either gets eaten by sheep or a cow. So if you drive around your forest, very clear boundary line, there is no fringe spread, there is no this, there is no that, because everything's so intensive around it. It's when you take those wrong species, which the ultimate one was probably at Mid-Dome, that Maricata and Contorta and the likes, and just let go free, right? And you also, the grass swards up there are very, very light, and so you'll get a lot of dirt that can be seen, in the cedar land in there and take, and they don't have the competition. Like unchecked, the grass on your boundaries uneaten would probably grow that tall. And the seedling just can't compete in there. Whereas up on the hill or in the wrong spot, the grass might grow that tall.
So from our perspective, it's probably really important for you to be able to articulate that to the ratepayers or to,
Oh, absolutely. Again, yeah.
Yeah, because it's a pretty hot topic, as you know, with regards to, obviously there's incentives for, say, farmers to be planting pine trees in areas whereby some people will argue it's questionable whether they should be planting those trees in those areas, and then there's the neighbour across, sort of 10 k's, I'm talking about hill country properties in particular.
Yeah.
And Mid-Dome's a great example of not what to do.
Yep.
And we learn from all that sort of stuff. So if you can, those things that you've described in terms of grazing pressure or appropriate tree in the right place, or using maybe ring planting of other species that don't spread as much to protect that for, I don't know, redwoods or whatever it is. Do you do that sort of stuff as well?
And potential, if we just go back a little bit, all the planting we do on new sites, you're not kind of in the new site camp, but I'll just go back to new site. Let me just start by saying we do not have a problem with wilding spread in your current forest. So we're governed as professional foresters by the National Environmental Standards for Afforestation. So on any new site that we go to plant, we have to fill out a wilding tree calculator. So you assess all the neighbouring land around you, you plug in the species that you're planting, and that, like predominantly your Forester radiata, it's one of the lowest in amongst the chain of spreadable trees, if you like. And as long as your score comes in below a specific number based on prevailing wind direction, surrounding land use, altitude, things like that, then you're either permitted or not permitted. If you're permitted, you can do it as of right, as long as it's the land zoned rural. A lot of the land on our hill country that will spread will be probably fall into, what do they call it, high, is it the scenic value?
It could be a
visual amenity. Yeah, that's probably where a lot of the risk lies in Southland. That land's kind of already been earmarked, so if you want to afforest there, you really do need a resource consent. The lowland stuff, so there is some triggers in there for new afforestation.
Yeah.
Councillor Case.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you for your attendance today and wisdom at the end of the table. In terms of the change of strategy to increase the level of, or maintain the level of stems per hectare, does that give rise to greater habitat for pests, likes of possums and deer and that? Or
I think it's much of a march, and I think, and I know where you live, and we've planted forests down your way. In short, no. I think on a per hectare basis, if there's so many deer per hectare, whether you've planted 500 stems, but I think if you left if you planted 1,000 stems and didn't thin it, you'd probably end up with less animals in there because there's nothing growing underneath. But just on that, it'd be good to reach this point as a forester, when we're doing new afforestation projects and down your way, we're now pricing deer fencing. Because the deer are just coming in and eating all our young trees. So whether it's forestry or not forestry, this is a major problem that everyone's going to face going forward.
certainly a major problem for everybody at the moment in the area. Across the SDC forest estate is the same pressure on from other animals, from deer particularly, but
Recent.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to house where it's building, yeah. There's, I suppose, not as much control out there with neighbours as there was, and yeah, I mean, the markets go up and down with pet foods and stuff like that too, so it sort of goes with that. But yeah, I mean, we're active on your estates with, we do have possum guys going around. We've recently cleaned out Wakaya, and there's various hunting licences issued. Some areas, like we know there's a number of pigs in Gowan Hill, so yeah. A bit tricky around the townships like Ojai. That's probably a concern, but just not as easy to, allow a lot of hunting in those types of forests by towns, and pests have suddenly turned up in those forests, so it's another challenge.
Pigs have an amazing ability to shift 50 kilometres somehow.
Further to that point, we just had a discussion earlier around taking that challenge of pest control, mainly deer, and turning that into an opportunity for to have wild kai to supplement the community gardens and that sort of thing. It's an opportunity to introduce that resource, to apply that back to the community. We have professional pest control teams who can dispatch appropriately, and we can make that available as part of that program. So that was a good conversation we had earlier. and it looks like that might get a bit of traction too.
That's great to hear because we have been talking about that locally as well too.
And we've got forestries in different locations, and we can take that regional location and put that koi back into that specific area. There's a lot of social benefit in young hunters that can accompany those teams, and they can take that back to their whānau and their family. So that would be a really good initiative, and we can follow that up.
Sounds good, thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, gentlemen. One last question, I promise. This is coming from a visit to another ratepayer, and this is not our forest there in Tuatapere, but this is a concern brought to me yesterday by this gentleman. An increased fire risk, increased number of stems. Is there something there? He has an issue with the one next door, which is not ours, but it just occurred to me.
Yeah.
No fuel sitting there?
I don't think it's a greater risk. I probably think it's a lower risk. The amount of branches that will be, well, I don't know what stems per hectare the forest beside him.
Yeah, no, but I'm just, since if we are going to a higher number of stems, is there a greater risk there? Is there something more we need to do via, in terms of mitigation strategies to reassure ratepayers?
I wouldn't have thought so. I think Ojai is probably your biggest risk of burning because it's so close to the main road and there's quite a lot of people getting around and all the rest of it. But I'm unsure, besides we've kept quite a buffer off the main road of straight grass. Besides that, I am unsure. I just want to talk about that too, because I think forestry is caught up in the big brush of forestry as well. I've kind of been doing forestry. I grew up in a forest. My father's a forester, and his father before him was a forester. I think back over the last 15 years, and I probably can count for about 10 forest fires that have occurred in Southland, of which I'd say the average area burnt was probably about 2 hectares. So as far as major risk goes, in Southland it's just not actually, we just haven't seen the risk. I probably haven't explained that well. The Awaroa wetlands that burnt last year probably burnt more forest and burnt more area than's been burnt in forestry in the last 100 years in Southland. I'm not.
My just question was around when we move to a high strategy. That's a question that might be a concern for ratepayers.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I'm more than happy to talk to that. I just think we've talked about a number of things going on with forestry and fire and erosion and wilding. A lot of these things are very, very broad brush that occur on certain sites and certain levels, you know what I mean?
And many of those are not our forests, but people, ratepayers, they see a greater number of forestry around.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I'm happy we're having this conversation because hopefully I'm sort of portraying agreed. This can be a potential in forestry. Is it a potential problem in Southland? I just don't think it is.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think that's just to add to what you said. I think we've talked about a lot of stuff outside the context of the report, but it's quite having your expertise at the table is really valuable and getting that broader understanding of the potential issues down the track and the wider issues that the district's facing outside of our own forests. So, thank you for that. Councillor Wilson, did you have something you wanted to?
Well, there's actually a couple of things. Just to follow on from the conversation about pest control, just wanted to raise I was familiar with Woodhill Forest up north of Auckland, so popular in deer hunting in the commercial forest that a ballot system's actually in place to manage how many people, because there's more people wanting to go in there to hunt than the forest can actually safely cater to. So it's a really good example of that, and it speaks to the wider question of, I guess these lots of land are commercial forests first and foremost, but as far as other recreational and access value, we've discussed recently the Waikaia Trails Trust having access. How would this pruning or non-pruning regime kind of affect other dual uses for communities? Doesn't affect.
For the wider community, they're just going to see another hectare of trees.
The other comment, just leading on from I guess Rob's comment, that there's other factors to consider. We're talking about a commercial forestry strategy, but a lot of the conversations have come up around environmental and community outcomes and things. So we're looking at this with a commercial lens on and value the expertise in that. Is there scope for then the council to be prudent around this commercial strategy by bringing in some other form of expertise regarding environmental impacts and potential social impacts and potential, well, I don't know about climate change. I know about, I can't predict the weather as much as I know about commercial forestry with my knowledge, but know that there are wider conversations to be had. How can we go around entertaining those conversations, getting on with the commercial aspect as the decision needs to be made on, but also have the future ability to adapt when we source more information regarding these other factors? It's an open question to anyone, really.
A lot of that actually, it feeds into earlier discussions we had today with that beyond 2025 and all those wider contexts, and trees and forestry form a piece of that wider Southland puzzle, and how we tie it all in together. And like you say, we have got this commercial, which is a huge asset to the ratepayers of Southland that's doing really well. So what else can we do with other land? What else can we do with pockets of the forestry potentially down the line? So yeah, I'm not really answering your question, but just adding to the comment really. Does anyone else want to?
Yeah, just look, it's fantastic to hear the commentary coming through, and I think if I start with Christine, you've brought up employment and the effect of that employment on and how the strategy impacts on that, and that's a great point. Good social context there, and I guess just Bree, you've brought up some really good things around water quality, water quantity, and fire risk, really key environmental aspects. Councillor Duffy made some very good points around biosecurity and understanding how that's working long term. Variable species, which is particularly relevant to, we're looking at that and seeing how that works, and also soil fertility, which is a really topical point for Southland.
I didn't mention how agitated my friend got here when you talked about the deer hunting all the same.
Look, and I think Tom, you've really centred on that commercial risk and wilding pines. And one was particularly important, which ties into Matt's point around communicating our portfolio and the importance of it is a commercial run forestry, but we've got other values that we need to integrate into that. IFS, when they do that strategy, that underpins that. So we've got those values and environmental down by the Forestry Institute and different regulatory things in the industry. So as we go forward, when those things are ticked off, so you're ticking off the environmental aspect, and then you go forward with that strategy. So the baseline risk is managed appropriately. We've got greater context to think about, and that's the social impact on the forestry unit. We've taken some great initiatives, obviously working with the Waikawa Trust. And to Councillor Byers, you're very conscious of the environmental risk. You've brought that up today. That's fantastic, and I think that sort of talks to this team a little bit too around how we're putting together some real values around the forestry that we want to stand by. We can integrate that. IFS is very accommodating to integrate that into that, but it's very important that we communicate that to the community. So I'll be going away having a think around how we're best to do that, working with Louise to understand how the portfolio is communicated for its commercial value, but for those other really important things as well. And Matt, we can talk further directly on how we might go that. We might bring Dan directly in with that conversation and try and get some value out of that and come back to you with those items later on, probably in the next meeting. And I think this will be something we talk about on an ongoing basis to grow and develop the portfolio.
Really well summarised, Chief. Thank you. So I think it's a good time to look at the recommendations that we've got on page 50. So we've got A through to F, noting that we're approving the proposed 25-year forest management plan and the harvest plan for 2023, approving unbudgeted expenditure for harvesting of 1.487 million to be funded from the harvesting income, and approves the varying of the existing contract with IBS Growth to align with the forest management plan.
Could I just, before we go forward with that, I just want to refer to Councillor Keith's comments, which also refer to the other chap, excuse my memory, Chamberlain. Very valid point. Talked around that, and we mentioned earlier that we might want to put aside 100 hectares of pruned. So perhaps we want to just adjust that resolution to achieve.
So yeah, is there an appetite for the table to actually put aside that area, or do we want to stick with the plan? Is it,
That's it, yeah. Look, to be honest, you can come back to that at a later date. We'll have many conversations like this in the future. I think it's good to start with what Julie has put forward, and we accommodate that. It's sensible, and we can always adapt to that later on.
So it's leaving them as they are, is that you
just we'll have a look at what the prime sites are for pruned logs, and what's really appropriate. It might be 50 hectares, it could be 60, it could be 100. It's the best option across a number of factors that Dan will come back to us with. But that won't actually change the resolution in terms of approving that unbudgeted expenditure going forward with the strategy. Because we need to be dynamic and mobile in how we set the strategy for the sport polio.
Sorry, through your worship, and Stu, that I'm guessing that, as Anton mentioned before, that the infrastructure associated with non-pruned versus pruned, if all of that is pushed in that direction, proportionally greater, based on what you're saying in terms of saying, well, if we put 100 hectares aside that will be pruned, potentially, I guess that measure will also have to be measured against people within the private sector as well. So the number of forests that are there as well.
That decision needs to be rationalised, yes, which is what you're suggesting, and that's where we go back to that model, understand where that sits. So I'm not prepared to guarantee that it'll be 100 hectares or 50 hectares. It's really down to the quality of our stock and what's appropriate, where we can get that value out of it. First and foremost, we're taking a return back to the ratepayer. We want to make sure if we put that aside, we're giving that ratepayer that value and guaranteeing that.
And that all fits within the scope of what we're approving here today?
That's correct. Yes, it does.
So someone in a position to move A through to F, Councillor Menzies, seconder, Councillor Duffy. Any discussion on it? Motion, all in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? That's carried. Thank you very much for coming. I know it's a busy time of the year, a few days before Christmas, but it was very valuable. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just as a personal thing for me, I know this table is grappling with some of the changes going on with maybe new afforestation in the Southland District Council. I put my hand up to come and talk to you guys maybe in the new year about what actually is going on, who is doing what and how it's happening, and maybe put some myths, or maybe I can tell you exactly what we're doing.
That'd be great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Let's do that.
Yeah, we'll do. We'll move. You can come back to the table, Stuart. We'll do the CISA.
Karen, would you like to invite Karen up as well? Is our community liaison for
on page number 27. Jumping all over the place.
Where's something like this, Karen? I don't know. Yes.
The floor is yours, Stuart.
Yes, thank you. Through you. I'm going to take, this report is relating to the vegetation trim for Stewart Island. I'll take the report as read. In summary, we are challenged with the vegetation impact in Stewart Island on the network. There's a considerable safety and reliability of power supply to customers in its current state. In the past, it's probably important to recognise in the past the Stewart Island Community Board have taken a pragmatic approach to deal with addressing the risk of vegetation against those power lines. And they've done that in a pragmatic and sensible way, and it's necessary to reduce expenditure and appropriately at the time. The way that that's now come to us is that the methodology that was used is actually generating greater growth. Like it's a hedge cut on the tree line. It's growing back into the power lines at a significant rate. So now we've got to go and take a longer term view and say, look, we want to do this in a more sustainable, financially sustainable and way to reduce the risk and trim back those trees with arborists and specialists to take care of that risk. Look, I think this actually, what this subject is all about is creating the budget expenditure to allow a process for the power lines to be cleared of vegetation on Stewart Island. And it comes back to really essentially an asset management process of taking a long-term view of how CIASA is going to manage our assets and do so in a financially sustainable way. So we took the approach of looking at the life cycle of our assets over that 30 to 40 year period, and what's the best way to address this ongoing risk of vegetation going through the power lines. We put a tender out. We got a number of suppliers, and we came away with one preferred supplier. The risk was we would exceed the current budget. That risk materialised, but over the duration of the asset's life, it's the best financial position to be in. And that's the approach that is being led by the Community Board, a very sensible asset management approach taken to CIASA that's looking at the long-term sustainability of power supply to Stewart Islanders. So Councillor Spraggan, the recent Stewart Island Community Board endorsed that approach to take a very good look at asset management in CIASA, provide a long-term solution to rectifying the risk of vegetation into those power lines, and they've come away with the decision to move forward with unbudgeted expenditure and take care of that risk.
Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Councillor?
I can only endorse it. In places, I took a couple of planning officers for a drive around the island after the last board meeting, and I was horrified to see a metre or up to 1.5 metres of trees through the middle of our power lines in several places. So with wind and the sea climate and everything, we're destined for power cuts if we don't do something major. And as Stuart said, there's a health and safety aspect for it.
Yeah, look, some of those lines, thanks John, some of those lines are 11 kVA. So if you get some rain, there's a tree coming through that tree can be live. We have someone touch that tree, and in exceptional circumstances, there's a tragedy for the community. Obviously there's a risk to the PCBU, but the centre is we need to be taking care of the risk to the community there in regards to that. Yes.
Councillor Menzies.
Thank you, Bishop. I'm happy to support this for the obvious reasons, I guess, in the report. The question it raises for me is what are the other areas across our district where we have a similar issue? And I'm not talking in the near future, but at some stage I think it'll be helpful to have a report coming to us where we're looking across the district with the issues with the trees and obviously the significant cost that we may be potentially facing over the next wee while, and where we can mitigate that risk early on and reduce the cost as opposed to leaving it for a longer period of time.
I think I'd be correct in assuming that the power services contract out the management of the trees by the power lines across Southland, is that?
They do, but I want to talk about, I'll come back to Councillor Menzies because she's raised an exceptionally good point. In relation to trees, in this report we're focused entirely on Stewart Island Electricity Authority and the effect of trees there. There is a lot of talk around the effect of trees, broadly speaking, so I think you might be talking about a regional discussion around the region. I want to just tap on something that you said there, which is very relevant, was how do we get information to know where we're at in relation to so these things don't pop up? It's exceptionally good point, and you're going to see me come to you over the next 12 months talking to you about asset management and ensuring that we have the right data to have the right planning to make the right decisions that then put our communities in a very good space financially, socially and environmentally. The core function there is getting the right data, and you heard Bobby this morning. I thought there was some great synergies between what Bobby was talking about and what we needed to do in CIOSA. Very well aligned. And that's great to see that Council can align a lot of their strategies across a number of areas that we're dealing with. Core to this decision was the community board who went forward with saying, yep, we want to see the data, we want to understand how we're going to benefit from this long term. Is it money well spent? Is that transparent? They've done a great job of discussing that. We're going to have a lot more discussions in relation to CIOSA around asset management, but the key thing is in the last few months, last 8 months or so with the CIOSA, we've put together a new contract with PowerNet. It's really driven some good outcomes for Stewart Island. It's also enabling us now that we've embedded the contract and the contractual relationship, which is very sound and producing good outcomes. It's now a time for that contract and the levers in that contract to start generating that asset management data for us that tells us about the age, condition, cost, future cost, timing of all of those assets that empower John's team on Stewart Island to make really good decisions around how they go forward with CIOSA. So I think we're going to see some really good decisions coming out of the Stewart Island Community Board around CIOSA. There'll be tough questions to approach, and some of them might be difficult answers to in terms of the cost associated with renewing assets and providing renewable solutions. But we need to do that in the context of facts, good data, and some really good understanding of asset management. So I'm going to assist the community board with that, and you'll definitely hear me talking about that in the future.
And I guess the tree management plan that we're looking at amongst identifying and then working with all the trees that we've got around the district, I guess the power line impact will focus on making an assumption again, but I imagine that will form part of it. But yeah, I think with Southland, it's and the question around that comment that I made about the power services around here, I know that they identify the trees and then they approach the owner and say your first cut's on us, and then after that it's up to you. So has that process already happened on the island, or is it different because of the makeup?
No, that is exactly it. So some of the start understanding that problem, it's actually understanding the problem that we had with that was where do we sit from a legislative point of view? That's kind of the baseline of where before we start making a decision on what we're going to do. What are we legally required to do? So you go back to that legislation, look for the specifications on how we trim trees. Part of that, as you say, is how does that affect private property owners? We've got a really good community over there who's really passionate about A, the environment, 2, the power supply. So what we've done is looked at that legislation and understanding how we're working with that community to get that first cut, because that first cut we pay for. The second cut we don't pay for. So there's actually a long-term savings in adopting this strategy, adopting that approach that is consistent with legislation to ensure that we get, over a long period of time, the best spend and the best bang for our buck when we start managing and maintaining these assets.
Any other questions? Councillor Duffy?
Oh, just, I was rather shocked when I went into this situation through the report and amazed that it's been 10 years since this was last done. You mentioned an arborist. I didn't think the report had an arborist. I just thought that when infrastructure's involved here, that they, like they do on the roads, that they would just trim everything.
Yeah, look, there is one amendment to that report. There was a partial trim in 2016 that we didn't actually have a record of, but the chairman of the community board alerted us to. That's local knowledge. That was trimmed in 2016. Same effect, great intent, pragmatic approach, did the job at the time. What we're seeing is that hedge trim approach, which you're saying has come across the road and trim, great approach, but long term, that's thickening the vegetation and bringing it out all as a bulk. We want to trim it right down using best practice that happens all around New Zealand in terms of how we trim those trees. So it's also quite difficult to actually get the hedge trim to do that work. So we did an overall assessment of the network, and some of it you'll never get any vehicle to. You have to go in and walk through the hills and chop those trees down. And part of that previous strategy was that it was head trimmed, but it couldn't actually get to a lot of areas. The other aspect of that is it's very unsafe to do that in the current environment. We heard Councillor Spraggan talking about trees coming through the lines. Those rotary hedge trimming devices, they're not isolated.
It's too late for that now.
Yeah.
Just to, through you, endorse that in the past, you only trimmed one side of the trees, the top and one side. The far side, because it's part of the bush, has never been looked at. And that's where a lot of the trouble is coming as well these days. And there is while the board have fully discussed it, we did have some concerns on certain areas that are on council land about the, taking the trees off at ground level because of opening up people's private homes and things. And Stuart and the chairman of the board and myself are meeting in January to go around and just identify areas that perhaps we won't bring to that level on council land. But it's never been cleared out to the proper width. And, to be clear of the power lines, we've just always relied on a hedge cutting type technique.
I think it's particularly important to recognise Stewart Island Community Board's approach to this. I was very impressed with their approach to how the asset should be managed. It's very good to see that the approach that John and the new chairman have taken in that regard. Taking that long-term sustainable approach, much the same approach we're taking to renewable energy on Stewart Island. Long-term asset management approach to what we see today. It's the same approach we're taking forward with Mana Whenua. We will take forward with Mana Whenua, the long-term sustainable approach to the commercial operation of Siasa, social and community outcomes that come with that.
Thanks for that, Stu.
Just through you, Your Worship, I'm not going to go into any great detail about this, but I think it's timely to. I've sent you all an email from a ratepayer which kind of dovetails into the tree trimming space. And like I said, I won't go into it in detail, but it does. I might, after you've had a look at it, Your Worship, maybe I would ask to see whether it's appropriate to forward this on to Stu. but it basically revolves around just some concerns around some of the compliances around tree trimming in Southland, some of the costs associated with it. This particular person has said that he believes there's only one currently approved company which deals with this kind of tree trimming work on behalf of the council.
I think we might, we'll take this outside of this report.
Sure.
Yeah, and have some discussion about that, but that's certainly something we can.
And I just gave this person an assurance that if I had time, that I would make you aware that I was going to bring it up today.
Yeah.
And I'll leave it at that.
Cool. Thanks, Councillor. Thank you. There's no further discussion. Is someone in a position to move?
Yeah, I will.
Councillor Keys gets the chocolate fish today for noticing in D that 2022 to 2023.
I think Stuart might have something else to say there.
2023. The current year or next year?
No, it's current.
I think Stuart.
Perhaps we'll finish that resolution. I'll come back to that, Tom.
Do we have a second? Councillor Green.
Moved it.
Councillor Green.
Very quickly, 2 council meetings ago, I had a discussion with Councillor Byers, and his question was, how are we looking at alternative energy and integrating that into some type of social outcome in Stewart Island? And we were directly aligned with that. We were very well aligned, and I said, I promise you I'm going to come back to you with a solution, and that solution is complete. It's done. And that is really around creating distributed generation on Stewart Island, and that is putting the infrastructure in place with meters to ensure that people can adopt alternative energy processes on their private property and feed that back into the network. So we have an infrastructure renewal program in place, ratified by the Community Board, that allows that to occur, and it is really significant because it takes care of a lot of the commercial risks YASA has in terms of power generation, but it does something a lot more significant, and that allows the community and ratepayers to get involved with that problem, to have a tangible input into resolving that problem as a community, and they can see through their meter the effect that they're having. I think that's a really good initiative. It's led by John. It's led by the chairman of that community board. It's another really good example of where this community board in Stewart Island is taking CASA forward with some really good decision making. So very impressed with that. It's a great result for the community.
So watch this space. It sounds really good.
Sounds good.
Sorry, if I could just ask a question on that. Is that something that potentially could council going forward in conversation could be looking at into regarding building consent processes?
Just conscious that we're going way straying from the actual report, which is the tree. So yeah, we'll pick that up. So it's been moved and seconded. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Anyone against? Carried. And I will break for lunch now. Thank you.
Yeah. Used to do. Oh, did he? And all he did was just that.
The hat was apt, given the topic this afternoon.
He's feeling generous.
The purpose of the report is to seek decisions on the remuneration of elected members and the allocation of the governance remuneration pool for the 2022 through 2025 triennium. The Remuneration Authority is responsible for setting the overall governance remuneration pool, which is the total value for councillor remuneration. For 2022-23, the pool has been set for Southland District Council at $466,309. The pool applies to base councillor positions and for councillors who hold positions of additional responsibility. It excludes the remuneration of the mayor and base remuneration of both community board members and community board chairs, which are determined by the authority separately. It also excludes remuneration of any independent appointments. The role of deputy mayor is the only position of additional responsibility established under council's new governance structure. Council must now consider how it wishes to distribute the pool amongst its elected members. The entire pool must be allocated. Staff are proposing that the pool is allocated on the basis that the Deputy Mayor receives remuneration at a rate of 1.3 times the rate of the base councillor remuneration. This proposal would provide an annualised remuneration of $49,326.98 for the Deputy Mayor and $37,943.82 for councillors, respectively. In addition to the recommendation provided, Attachment A of the agenda sets out alternative remuneration allocation rates should council also wish to consider these. I also have a calculator with me if other numbers wish to be considered today. Councillors are asked to note, for the purpose of managing conflicts of interest, that the decision on remuneration being sought today has an exception from the non-participation rules under the Local Authorities Members' Interests Act, which is confirmed in guidance provided by the Auditor General. In addition, the Remuneration Authority are independent of Council and have the statutory authority under the Local Government Act to determine the remuneration of elected members. The Remuneration Authority will consider Council's proposal and make a decision, which is then confirmed by a formal determination, at which point Council staff will be required to implement the decision and backdate remuneration accordingly. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that, Chris. Do we have any questions?
Just one. When the new structure was, sent round us regarding just the one committee, it was said that it could be looked at again in the new year, depending on how it worked out as a trial. So I just wondered if by any chance it did go back to a committee structure, would there be room to remunerate the chairs of those committees?
Through you, Your Worship. So the entire pool must be allocated when we submit our proposal. So if the governance structure is changed and new additional positions of responsibility are established, then we would have to, one, go back to the Remuneration Authority to confirm the appointment of those new additional positions, and then we would have to look to reallocate that same pool again. So essentially, I guess on the basis of what occurred from the previous triennium, is the additional remuneration that went to committee chairs previously has essentially been absorbed in the base remuneration. So that would reverse where new council or committee chairpersons were appointed.
So I guess what you look along the lines of what you said earlier is we can only ever make a recommendation around this to the Remuneration Authority, who will have the final decision. So, but we could make a recommendation at any stage should we want to make a change.
That's correct, yes. So for the purpose, this is for the purposes of remuneration following the local body elections, and so this needs to be submitted now for the current structure by the end of January.
Anyone else got any questions? I can just make a comment around the deputy mayor and the workload that that role has, and I think Councillor Menzies over the last couple of months has experienced a much bigger workload than the councillor last triennium. It's quite a full-on role, so I certainly support it being an increase even on the last year's deputy as well. I think the workload in our sector is getting bigger and bigger, and the demands on the deputy mayor's time will be quite substantial over this triennium. Councillor Menzies?
I'm just saying, in relation to the last question, it's always difficult talking about remuneration when it affects yourself, so excuse that, but I'd have no difficulty with reallocation being looked at should the structure need to change because it's not working.
Councillor East.
Thank you, Worship. The question of workload, does this include the local, the those involved with the liquor licensing authority?
I believe the hearings get paid for independently, separately. So yeah, that's over and above remuneration.
But if for the work that they do every day is, like just improving the ones that come on the table, that workload, it's not recognised in this structure.
Do you think it needs to be?
Well, I would like to pose that question to Councillor Duffy, because I do know that this comes through quite a bit. There's quite a lot I was just listening to the emails that come through in this car, and a lot of them were about when we were travelling to Te Anau.
Well, thank you for raising it. But I'm prepared to do it voluntarily, but it is a lot of work in terms of hours. I do probably a dozen a week, and it does. Well, I try and do them properly, so it does take time. But it's not as though I've been keeping the garden weeded and things like that. I don't. Pressures that some other people have.
Because one of the things that I looked at when I was doing the structure was, look, we've all got those different roles, from community board representation to those external committees, and it's really hard to sort of quantify which role sort of does. But I'm certainly open. I mean,
The other thing about it is, of course, all of those licences, they pay the fee to apply. So I don't know what the distribution of that is. You know what I mean? I know that the council has not been charging, they were falling behind. I think it was being subsidised by rates at one point. I think that's been rectified, but I don't know. But I'm not looking for recompense, but certainly it is a role that does involve a lot of time, I don't know.
Well, Councillor Menzies said it's hard talking about the remuneration role, but certainly I think you do feel like you do need to get some more.
You can see I'm not going hungry as a result.
Councillor
Thanks, Rob. I'm just reading the Remuneration Authority is also the independent statutory regarding the expenses. So regarding the new governance structure and increase things, has that been quantified, what that cost of expense of increased travel is going to look like?
When you look at and it's just something I looked at as well when I was setting it up, from last triennium, the number of times people travelling to and from council with the committee meetings, it was almost every 2 weeks anyway, so I don't think there's going to be too much additional. I mean, it will be slightly different, but yeah, I think it will almost be immaterial as far as a significant difference goes. Any other questions or comments? Someone in a position to move A through to D? Councillor O'Brien, Councillor Runcorn. Any further discussion on that? I'll put the motion to the table. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? Carried. Right. We're up to public excluded now, I think, so we'll wait till we go offline. Oh, we'll move, sorry, someone like to move that we, Councillor Menzies.